The storm came without warning. Black clouds swallowed the afternoon sun, plunging the Cumberland Gap into premature darkness. Wind howled through the ancient trees, bending trunks that had stood for centuries. Rain fell in sheets so dense they obscured the world beyond arm's reach. Nathaniel Swift crouched beneath a rocky outcropping, watching the deluge with practiced patience. At 34 winters, he had learned to read the forest's moods like others read faces. This storm spoke of rage, wild, unrelenting, dangerous. No prey would move in such weather. The wounded deer he'd been tracking would have to wait. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley below in harsh white light. In that brief flash, something caught Nathaniel's eye, something that didn't belong. A splash of color against the mud and stone of the ravine. He narrowed his eyes, waiting for the next lightning strike. When it came, his suspicions were confirmed. There, at the bottom of the steep embankment, lay a crumpled form, a human form. Every instinct warned him to turn away. Chief Silver Fox's words echoed in his mind. "Avoid the wagon roads. The white man's justice falls heavily on any of our people found near their trails." Another flash of lightning. The figure hadn't moved. Nathaniel adjusted the bow slung across his back and began his descent. The mud-slicked terrain made each step treacherous. Twice he nearly lost his footing, catching himself on exposed roots and rock edges. By the time he reached the bottom, rain had soaked through his buckskin leggings and moccasins. The figure was a woman. Her pale skin seemed to glow against the dark earth, her dress spread around her like a broken flower. Blood mixed with rain on her temple. One leg bent at an unnatural angle. A settler woman, far from any wagon train. Nathaniel crouched beside her, fingers hovering above her throat. He should leave. This was not his concern. The woman's people would not hesitate to shoot a Shawnee found looming over one of their women. Then he noticed the swell of her belly beneath the sodden dress. With child, far along. As if sensing his presence, the woman's eyes fluttered open, eyes the color of summer sky, clouded with pain and fear. She gasped, trying to scramble away despite her injuries. "Please," she whispered, one protective hand moving to shield her belly. "My baby." Nathaniel raised his open palms in the universal gesture of peace. "Not harm," he said in the broken English he had learned through limited trade interactions. "Help." The woman stared at him, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. Rain continued to pelt them both. Another contraction seized her, and she bit her lip to stifle a cry. "My name." "Eleanor Reed," she managed, each word an effort. "He pushed me from the wagon." Nathaniel frowned. "Who push?" "Malcolm, my brother-in-law." Her eyes filled with the tears that mingled with the rain. "For the land, my husband's land." Understanding dawned. Even among the Shawnee, disputes over hunting territories could turn deadly. But to harm a woman with child? Eleanor's face contorted in pain. "My leg," she gasped. "I think it's broken." Nathaniel nodded, gesturing to indicate he would need to examine it. When she gave a hesitant nod of permission, his touch was gentle as he felt along the limb. The break was clean, a small mercy. He could fashion a splint here, but proper treatment would require more than he carried. "Baby comes too early," she said, guiding his hand to her belly, where unnatural contractions rippled beneath her skin. "Please help us." The decision crystallized in that moment. Whatever the consequences, Nathaniel could not leave this woman and her unborn child to die. His people might not understand, but the Great Spirit would know his heart. With methodical efficiency, he gathered branches to fashion a travois, a frame of saplings lashed together with strips of hide from his pack. As gently as possible, he lifted Eleanor onto this makeshift transport, using his spare buckskin shirt to create padding beneath her. "Far?" she asked as he prepared to begin the journey back to his encampment. Nathaniel gestured to the sky, now barely visible through breaking clouds, then held up 4 fingers. 4 hours of travel lay ahead, 4 hours during which this woman's life and that of her child hung in the balance. He offered her his water skin, which she accepted gratefully. "Why me?" she asked during a pause to adjust her position, the question encompassing all the complexities of their situation. Nathaniel considered her words, searching for an explanation she might understand. Finally, he placed his hand gently on her swollen belly, then raised it skyward. "All children," he said carefully. Gift from Creator. The simple statement hung between them, a bridge across worlds that had every reason to remain divided. Eleanor Reed drifted in and out of consciousness as pain racked her body. The steady movement of the travois, despite Nathaniel's efforts to choose the smoothest path, sent waves of agony through her broken leg with each bump and dip in the terrain. In her lucid moments, fragmented memories surfaced through the haze of pain. 6 months earlier, the doctor's face, grave with sympathy, telling her Thomas was gone. A sudden illness after dinner with his brother Malcolm. Too swift, too violent to be natural. I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Reed. Your husband's heart simply gave out. But Thomas had been 32, strong as an oak. Malcolm's false concern afterward. You'll come west with us, of course. Family takes care of family. His eyes never quite meeting hers when he spoke those words. April 1847 had begun with reluctant hope as their caravan of 26 wagons departed Independence, Missouri. Despite her circumstances, widowed, 6 months pregnant, dependent on her husband's brother, Eleanor had allowed herself to imagine the new life awaiting in Oregon Territory, a life where her child might grow up beneath open skies, unburdened by the whispers that had followed them in their small Virginia town. You'll ride with us, Malcolm had insisted, pointing to his wagon where his wife Catherine sat stone-faced. No sense in you managing your own rig in your condition. Gratitude had overwhelmed caution. Then, as the wagon train pushed through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky territory, Eleanor understood the true nature of Malcolm's charity. Her dead husband's land claim documents were tucked safely in the leather pouch she kept tied to her waist day and night. Papers Malcolm had casually suggested she let him keep safe on no fewer than 5 occasions. Seems to me a woman in your delicate state shouldn't be burdened with such worries, he would say, his voice honeyed with false concern as his fingers twitched toward the pouch. The weather had turned that fateful day. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains as the wagon train navigated a particularly treacherous pass. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the already difficult trail into a river of mud. The oxen struggled, hooves slipping as wagon wheels ground helplessly against stone and slick earth. Eleanor sat in the rear of Malcolm's wagon, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, the other gripping the wooden frame as the vehicle lurched and swayed. Catherine had fallen unusually silent, exchanging meaningful glances with her husband as he guided the struggling team forward. Might be best if we lighten the load, Malcolm called back during a momentary break in the downpour. Some of these personal effects will have to go. Perhaps we should stop and wait for the weather to clear, Eleanor suggested, her voice barely audible above the renewed patter of rain on canvas. Malcolm's laugh held no humor. And risk getting caught in these mountains come winter? No, Mrs. Reed, we push on. It happened so quickly, the wagon hit a deep rut, tilting precariously to one side. Eleanor felt hands at her back, not steadying, but pushing, and then she was falling, tumbling through open air. Her scream was lost in a crack of thunder as the ground rushed up to meet her. The pain was immediate and all-encompassing. Something in her leg had snapped upon impact, and a warm trickle of blood ran down her temple. But most terrifying was the cramping in her abdomen, sharp, vicious contractions that threatened the life growing within her. "Malcolm," she called out, her voice a strangled gasp as rain pelted her face. "Catherine, help me!" The only response was the continued creaking of wagon wheels, growing fainter as the train moved on without her. Whether they hadn't heard her cries or had chosen to ignore them, Eleanor couldn't know. What she did know with devastating clarity was that she had been abandoned, left to die in an unmarked grave. Her land claimed the only inheritance Malcolm truly cared about. As consciousness began to slip away, Eleanor's final thought was of her unborn child. "I'm sorry," she whispered, one hand still cradling her belly. "I'm so sorry, little one." Another contraction, stronger than the last, pulled Eleanor back to the present. She gasped, clutching at Nathaniel's arm. "Getting worse," she panted. "Coming faster." Nathaniel nodded grimly, increasing his pace. The terrain had grown steeper as he led them deeper into the mountains, following hidden paths no wagon train could navigate. Eleanor's contractions had become more regular, a terrifying development that lent urgency to their already desperate journey. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and Nathaniel gestured ahead to where a small valley nestled between protective slopes. Thin spirals of smoke rose from what appeared to be a collection of dome-shaped dwellings partially hidden among the trees. A Shawnee village, carefully positioned to remain unseen from common travel routes. Nathaniel paused, clearly weighing final doubts against necessity. Bringing a white woman into the heart of his people's sanctuary was a momentous decision. Whatever internal debate he experienced resolved quickly as Eleanor cried out, a particularly violent contraction seizing her body. He made a sound, a high distinctive call that mimicked a woodland bird. Within moments, the call was returned from the valley below. Alert had been given. They were expected now. The approach to the village became a blur to Eleanor as pain overwhelmed her senses. She was vaguely aware of movement around them, curious faces, exclamations in a language she didn't understand. Some voices raised in what seemed like protest. Through it all, Nathaniel's steady presence remained her one constant. They stopped before a larger dwelling near the center of the encampment. An elderly woman emerged, her face a map of deep lines that spoke of decades of experience. Despite her advanced years, she moved with surprising agility, kneeling immediately beside the travois to examine Eleanor. Grandmother, Nathaniel addressed her respectfully in their shared language. This woman was abandoned by her people. She carries a new life that comes too soon. The woman, whom Eleanor would later know as Gentle Rain, studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond physical ailments to the very core of a person. After a long moment, she nodded decisively. "Bring her inside," she instructed, already turning to prepare her dwelling. "The child approaches the threshold between worlds. We must act quickly if both are to survive." As Nathaniel carefully lifted Eleanor from the travois, she clutched at his arm with surprising strength. "My baby," she whispered, desperation clear in her voice. "Please save my baby." He met her gaze steadily. "Gentle Rain has brought more children into this world than there are stars in the sky," he assured her, his English careful and deliberate. "Trust her. Trust me." In that moment, surrounded by strangers whose language and ways were foreign to her, Eleanor Reed made the conscious choice to place her faith in the man who had found her broken and abandoned. As another contraction seized her body, she nodded, surrendering herself to whatever fate awaited beyond the entrance to the medicine woman's lodge. The last thing she saw before being carried inside was a circle of Shawnee villagers gathering, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Whatever happened next would change not just her own destiny, but potentially that of many others. As darkness claimed her consciousness once more, Eleanor's final thought was a prayer, not to the stern God of her childhood, but to whatever compassionate force had guided Nathaniel to her side when all hope seemed lost. Chief Silver Fox watched the commotion from the entrance of his lodge, his weathered face revealing nothing of the turmoil within. At 62 winters, he had led the White Birch Band of Shawnee through 2 decades of increasing encroachment by white settlers. Each year brought more broken promises, more stolen land, more reason to retreat deeper into the mountains. And now Nathaniel Swift had brought a white woman, a pregnant white woman, into the very heart of their sanctuary. "This is madness," River Song muttered beside him. At 25, the young warrior represented the future of their band, fierce, proud, and increasingly bitter about the shrinking world available to the Shawnee. "If the settlers discover her here, they will use it as an excuse to attack us." Silver Fox held up a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving the scene before Gentle Rain's lodge. "Nathaniel Swift has earned the right to be heard," he said finally. "We will call council when the woman's condition is known." Inside the medicine lodge, time seemed to bend and stretch. Gentle Rain worked with swift efficiency, her wrinkled hands moving with the confidence born of countless births attended over her 76 winters. The dwelling was warm, fragrant with herbs that hung in dried bundles from the center poles, their healing properties filling the air Eleanor breathed. "The white woman's water has broken," Gentle Rain announced, directing 2 young women who had entered to assist. "The child comes too early, but it comes nonetheless. We must prepare." Nathaniel remained at the entrance of the lodge, uncertain of his place in the intimate female ritual of childbirth. Among the Shawnee, men typically waited outside during delivery, but he found himself reluctant to leave Eleanor among strangers with no familiar face to anchor her. "Grandson," Gentle Rain said, noticing his hesitation, "your presence brought her here." Perhaps it should remain until she finds her strength. With a nod of gratitude, Nathaniel settled near the head of the bed of soft furs where Eleanor now lay. One of the assisting women had removed her sodden dress, replacing it with a clean buckskin shift that allowed access to both her broken leg and swollen belly. The leg had been expertly splinted with strips of cedar and bound with sinew. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion giving way to recognition as she saw Nathaniel. "The baby," she gasped, hands flying to her abdomen as another contraction seized her. "Coming," he said simply, taking her hand in his own. "Strong medicine here." Gentle Rain approached, offering Eleanor a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid. "Drink," she instructed in her own language, gesturing for Nathaniel to translate. "For pain," he explained. "Help baby." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before accepting the brew. The taste was bitter but not unpleasant, reminiscent of willow bark and other herbs she couldn't identify. Almost immediately, a warmth spread through her limbs, dulling the sharp edges of her pain without clouding her mind. What followed was a blur of sensation and effort. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as Eleanor's body fought to bring new life into the world despite its injuries and exhaustion. Gentle Rain guided her with gentle but firm hands, her face an impassive mask of concentration, broken only by occasional nods of approval. Nathaniel remained a steadfast presence, translating the medicine woman's instructions when needed, offering his hand for Eleanor to grip during the worst contractions. In those intense moments of shared humanity, the vast differences between their worlds seemed to dissolve. Outside the lodge, the village held its collective breath. The arrival of a white woman, pregnant and injured, had spread through the small community like wildfire. Some viewed her presence as a dangerous intrusion. Others saw only a mother in need. Chief Silver Fox had called a council of elders to discuss the implications, while Gentle Rain tended to her patient. "Nathaniel Swift has invited trouble to our doorstep," River Song argued heatedly. "When this woman's people discover she is among us, they will come with their guns and accusations." "And if he had left her today," countered Morning Dove, a young mother whose gentle voice nevertheless commanded respect, "would that not prove true every dark tale the white settlers tell about our people?" Silver Fox listened to all perspectives before speaking. "The woman is here now," he said finally. "Gentle Rain attends her. Until both mother and child are stable enough to travel, we will offer sanctuary. After that, we must find a way to return her to her own kind without bringing retribution upon ourselves." The decision was made. The council dispersed, though tension lingered in the air like the static before a storm. Inside the medicine lodge, Eleanor's labor had reached its climax. "Push now," Gentle Rain instructed through Nathaniel, positioning herself to receive the infant. "Your child comes." With a cry that seemed torn from the depths of her being, Eleanor summoned her remaining strength for one final effort. The sensation of release was immediate and overwhelming, a rush of fluid and movement, followed by a moment of breathless silence. Then a thin wail pierced the air, the indignant protest of a new life thrust too early into the harsh light of existence. "A daughter," Nathaniel translated, as Gentle Rain efficiently cut the cord and wrapped the tiny red-faced infant in a soft rabbit skin. Small but strong. Tears streamed freely down Eleanor's face as the medicine woman placed the swaddled newborn on her chest. Despite arriving nearly 2 months before her time, the child had a lusty cry and a determined grip that wrapped around Eleanor's finger when she offered it. "Hello, little one," she whispered, drinking in every detail of the daughter she had feared she would never meet. "We made it." Gentle Rain examined the afterbirth carefully, nodding with satisfaction when she found it whole and healthy. She prepared a poultice of herbs for Eleanor's still bleeding body, murmuring prayers of healing as she worked. "Both mother and child have strong spirits," Nathaniel translated. "But the journey was difficult. You must rest now." Exhaustion claimed Eleanor soon after, her arms still cradled protectively around her newborn daughter as both drifted into much-needed sleep. Gentle Rain shooed everyone but Nathaniel from the lodge, instructing him to alert her immediately if either patient showed signs of distress. Left alone with the sleeping pair, Nathaniel found himself contemplating the strange turns of fate that had led to this moment. The woman looked younger in sleep, the lines of pain and fear smoothed from her face. The infant's tiny features held that universal newborn quality that transcended lineage or race, a reminder that all people began their journey the same way, regardless of the paths they would later walk. Dawn was breaking when Chief Silver Fox entered the medicine lodge. The older man moved with the dignity that had earned him his position, his face impassive as he surveyed the sleeping white woman and her child. "The council has reached its decision," he informed Nathaniel in their native tongue. "The woman and her infant may remain until they are strong enough to travel without risk to their health. Then they must return to their own people." Nathaniel nodded, having expected no different. "And how do we accomplish this return without endangering ourselves? Her own family abandoned her. There may be no one searching for her." Silver Fox's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "There is a trading post 3 days' journey from here. White trappers and missionaries sometimes pass through. When the time comes, we will find a way." The chief's gaze lingered on the sleeping infant. "The child was born on Shawnee land, under Shawnee care. She is connected to our people now, whatever her future holds." With those words, he departed, leaving Nathaniel to contemplate their meaning. Eleanor awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight filtering through the smoke hole of a dwelling not her own. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place her surroundings. Then memories flooded back. The fall, the pain, the stranger who had become her salvation, and finally the birth of her daughter. Her daughter. Panic seized her as she realized the infant no longer lay against her chest. Attempting to sit up, she gasped as pain shot through her splinted leg and battered body. "Be still," came a now familiar voice. Nathaniel sat nearby, and in the crook of his arm rested her swaddled child. She cried, "You needed rest." Relief washed over Eleanor at the sight of her daughter, apparently content in the hunter's careful hold. The normality of the tableau, a man cradling a fussing newborn to allow a new mother some precious sleep, struck her with its universality. This scene could have played out in any cabin back in Virginia. "Thank you," she said, the simple phrase inadequate for all it needed to convey. Nathaniel acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, rising to bring the infant to her mother. As Eleanor took her daughter, she was struck by how natural it felt to hold her, despite never having done so before. "She needs name," Nathaniel said, settling back on his heels. Eleanor gazed down at the tiny face. Names held power, her grandmother had always said. They shaped a person's destiny in ways seen and unseen. "Liberty," she finally decided. "Her name is Liberty." Nathaniel tested the word, nodding his approval. "Good name. Strong." Eleanor smiled weakly. She was born free of the lies and schemes that had surrounded us, and she helped free me from a fate I wouldn't have survived. She looked up at Nathaniel, her eyes clouding with worry. "What happens now, to us?" Nathaniel's expression remained neutral, though his eyes betrayed conflicting emotions. "Chief says when strong enough, must return to white people." The answer was expected, but nevertheless painful. Eleanor had no illusions about the reality of their situation. She couldn't remain indefinitely in a Shawnee village, especially not with tensions between settlers and native tribes growing more volatile by the season. Yet the prospect of returning to a world that had literally cast her aside filled her with dread. "Malcolm thinks I'm dead," she said quietly, referring to her brother-in-law for the first time since her rescue. "Oh, he'll have claimed my husband's land grant by now. I have nowhere to go." Nathaniel considered this new information carefully. "Trading post," he suggested after a moment. 3 days from here. White people there might help." The proposal was reasonable yet terrifying. A lone woman with a newborn, starting over with nothing but the clothes on her back. The odds of survival seemed impossibly slim. "When?" she asked, unconsciously drawing Liberty closer to her chest. 2 weeks, Nathaniel replied. "Leg must be stronger. Baby too. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare herself for re-entry into a world that had no place for her." Eleanor nodded her acceptance, though her heart hammered with anxiety. That night, after Liberty had been fed and settled in the makeshift cradle the village women had constructed, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. The future stretched before her like a vast wilderness, more threatening than the physical one through which Nathaniel had carried her. Her hand drifted to the leather pouch, still secured at her waist. Inside lay not only Thomas's land claim, but also the letter she had discovered among his papers after his death. a letter from her mother that had shaken the foundations of everything Eleanor thought she knew about herself. My dearest daughter, there are truths I should have shared long ago. Your father forbade it, fearing how the world would judge us, judge you. But with his passing, I can no longer bear the weight of silence. I had a sister once, a Cherokee woman named White Feather. Our father disowned her when she married outside the tribe, and I was forbidden to speak her name. But she was kind and brave, and when I fled my own unhappy marriage, it was White Feather who sheltered me. It was there, among the Cherokee, that I met your father, a doctor with kind eyes who treated all people as equals. We fell in love, and when we returned to Virginia, we agreed the truth of our meeting and of my time with the Cherokee would remain our secret. You have your aunt's eyes, Eleanor. Her spirit too, I think. Perhaps one day you will find what I could not, the courage to live truthfully, embracing all parts of who you are. With all my love, Mother Eleanor had read the letter 100 times since discovering it, each reading raising more questions than answers. What did it mean for her identity? For liberties? Had Thomas known this secret when he married her? She traced her fingers over the small mark on her shoulder, a birthmark her mother had always called a kiss from an angel. Now she wondered if it was something else entirely, a heritage carried in her blood, visible on her skin. A soft sound drew her from her thoughts. Nathaniel had returned, carrying a small clay pot that emitted a fragrant steam. From gentle rain, he explained, offering the vessel. For sleep. Eleanor accepted the remedy gratefully. As the soothing liquid warmed her from within, she found herself studying Nathaniel's profile as he stoked the lodge's small fire. Why do you stay? She asked him directly. You've done more than enough. You have your own life, your own responsibilities. Nathaniel was silent for so long that Eleanor thought perhaps he hadn't understood her question. When he finally answered, his words were careful, measured. Among my people, when life is saved, a bond is formed. I found you, brought you here. Until you reach safety again, responsibility is mine. The explanation was logical, yet Eleanor sensed layers beneath it that remained unspoken. Whatever his full reasons, she was profoundly grateful for his continued presence. As the herb-induced drowsiness began to claim her, Eleanor found herself wondering about this man who had risked so much for a stranger. What forces had shaped him? What joys and sorrows had he known? The questions followed her into dreams, where forests and mountains gave way to faces both familiar and strange, all watching her with eyes that seemed to hold secrets just beyond her understanding. The following days established a rhythm that helped anchor Eleanor in this strange new world. Each morning, gentle rain would check her healing leg and Liberty's progress, nodding with increasing approval as both mother and child showed remarkable resilience. Young women from the village, initially wary, began to visit the medicine lodge, their curiosity about the white woman and her infant overcoming their reservations. Mourning Dove, who had a son just 6 moons old, became a regular visitor, demonstrating techniques for swaddling and soothing that had been passed down through generations of Shawnee mothers. Though they shared no common tongue, the universal language of motherhood bridged the gap between them. Eleanor found herself eagerly absorbing these lessons, recognizing their practical wisdom. Nathaniel visited daily, sometimes bringing small gifts, a carved wooden rattle for Liberty, fresh berries for Eleanor, a comb fashioned from bone. Each offering was presented without ceremony, yet received with growing appreciation. On the 7th day after Liberty's birth, Nathaniel arrived with unexpected company, Chief Silver Fox himself. The older man's presence filled the small lodge with an authority that transcended language barriers. He studied Eleanor with penetrating eyes before speaking at length to Nathaniel. The chief wishes to know more about the man who abandoned you, Nathaniel translated. What kind of threat he might pose to our village if he learns you survived. Eleanor shifted uneasily. She had hoped to avoid this conversation, but she understood their need for caution. My husband Thomas died 6 months ago, she began, choosing her words carefully. His brother Malcolm inherited everything except the land claim Thomas had secured for our child's future. Malcolm offered to bring me west with his family, but I now believe he never intended for me to reach Oregon. She described the events leading to her abandonment, the calculated way Malcolm had pushed her from the wagon during the storm. He believes I'm dead, and that's how he would prefer it. If he discovered I survived, he would see me, and anyone who helped me, as a threat to his claim on my husband's land. Nathaniel translated her account, watching the chief's expression grow increasingly grave. Silver Fox asked if you have evidence of this land claim, Nathaniel relayed. Papers that prove your right to it. Eleanor nodded, patting the leather pouch at her waist. Everything is here. Thomas was meticulous about documentation. After more discussion, Nathaniel turned back to Eleanor. The chief says your brother by marriage sounds like a dangerous man. When you are well enough to travel, we must ensure you reach safety without leading him to our people. The conversation shifted then, with Silver Fox asking about Eleanor's skills and knowledge. Through Nathaniel's translation, she shared her limited medical training. Her father had been a doctor who sometimes allowed her to assist with simple procedures in the preparation of remedies. This information seemed to interest the chief greatly. After a lengthy exchange with Nathaniel that Eleanor couldn't follow, Silver Fox rose to leave. At the lodge entrance, he paused, saying something directly to Eleanor, despite her inability to understand. He says the child born on Shawnee land carries two worlds within her, Nathaniel translated after the chief had gone. How she walks between them will depend on what her mother teaches her. The words resonated deeply with Eleanor, reminding her of her mother's letter and the heritage she herself had only recently discovered. Two worlds within her as well, a secret carried in her blood, unknown to those around her. That afternoon, when gentle rain deemed Eleanor strong enough for short walks, Nathaniel helped her outside for the first time since her arrival. Liberty secured against her chest in a carrying sling Morning Dove had fashioned, Eleanor took tentative steps into the village proper. The Shawnee settlement revealed itself to be a place of unexpected beauty and order. Unlike the chaotic sprawl of settler towns, every aspect of the village existed in harmony with its natural surroundings. Dwellings were positioned to capture sunlight and shield against prevailing winds. Gardens flourished with a variety of crops planted in companion groupings that Eleanor, raised on a farm, recognized as ingeniously effective. Children played games that combined recreation with practical skills development. Women worked together at communal tasks, their conversation flowing in a musical language that Eleanor found herself straining to understand. Men returned from hunting or fishing expeditions, sharing their bounty according to a system that ensured all received what they needed. It was a way of life both utterly foreign and oddly familiar, the fundamental elements of community, family, and survival, transcending cultural differences. As they walked slowly through the village, Eleanor became acutely aware of the scrutiny she attracted. Some gazes were openly hostile, particularly from a group of young warriors who watched her with undisguised suspicion. Others, especially the women, showed cautious curiosity. They fear what your presence might bring, Nathaniel explained, noticing her discomfort. Our people have suffered much from broken promises and stolen land. Eleanor nodded, understanding their wariness. I would feel the same in their position. They paused at the village edge, where a small stream provided fresh water. Sitting on a smooth boulder while Nathaniel filled a water skin, Eleanor watched Liberty sleep peacefully in her sling, oblivious to the complexities surrounding her birth. You said your husband died, Nathaniel ventured, settling beside her. How? The question caught Eleanor off guard, but something in Nathaniel's manner encouraged honesty. Officially, his heart failed, she said quietly. But that Thomas was young and strong. The night he died, we had dined with Malcolm. By morning, Thomas was gone. She hesitated, then continued, voicing the suspicion she had harbored for months. I believe Malcolm poisoned him. Thomas had begun to question some of his brother's business dealings, transactions that weren't entirely legal. And then there was the land claim, which Thomas refused to include in his will to Malcolm. Nathaniel's expression darkened. This Malcolm sounds like man with darkness in heart. Yes, Eleanor agreed, surprised by how liberating it felt to speak these thoughts aloud after months of silent suspicion. I have no proof, though, just my intuition and some strange occurrences before Thomas died. Nathaniel was silent for a moment, then asked, the land claim, it is very valuable. Eleanor nodded. 800 acres in Oregon Territory, prime farmland with water access. Thomas purchased it from the government before prices rose. It's worth a small fortune now. What she didn't mention, what she herself had only recently discovered through careful reading of Thomas's papers, was the true reason for the land's exceptional value. A geological survey had identified potential oil deposits beneath the fertile soil. Information Thomas had kept secret from everyone but his wife. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of River Song, the young warrior Eleanor had noticed watching her with particular hostility. He spoke rapidly to Nathaniel and Shawnee, his tone challenging, his stance aggressive. Nathaniel responded calmly but firmly, occasionally gesturing toward Eleanor and Liberty. The exchange grew heated, with River Song's voice rising while Nathaniel's remained measured. Finally, with a dismissive gesture and a last glare at Eleanor, River Song stalked away. "What was that about?" Eleanor asked once he was out of earshot. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He lost sister to settler attack 2 summers ago. Believes all white people carry same hatred in their hearts. Eleanor felt a wave of sadness for the young man's loss, understanding now the source of his animosity. "I'm sorry about his sister. He has every reason to distrust me." "Not all wounds heal clean," Nathaniel agreed. "Some fester, turn heart bitter." As they walked back toward Gentle Rain's lodge, Eleanor found herself wondering about Nathaniel's own history. What wounds had shaped him? What had given him the capacity to see beyond the color of her skin when others could not? Before she could frame a question, Liberty began to fuss, ready for her next feeding. The practical demands of motherhood pushed deeper inquiries aside, at least for the moment. That evening, as Eleanor nursed Liberty by the lodge fire, Nathaniel arrived with an unexpected offering, a small wooden frame strung with thin strips of sinew. "For dreams," he explained, presenting it to her. "Catches bad ones, lets good ones through." The dream catcher was intricately crafted, with a small piece of turquoise secured at its center. Eleanor accepted it with genuine appreciation, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," she said, admiring the craftsmanship. "Did you make this?" Nathaniel nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Old skill. My father taught." Eleanor hung the dream catcher on the lodge wall above the place where she and Liberty slept. The gesture seemed to please Nathaniel, who settled cross-legged near the fire. As Liberty finished nursing and drifted to sleep, Eleanor adjusted her dress and placed the infant in her cradle. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and Liberty's occasional sighs. In that moment of quiet intimacy, Eleanor found herself studying Nathaniel more carefully than she had before. His features were strong, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. His dark eyes held a depth of thought that belied the simplicity of his broken English. There was a stillness about him that she found calming, a centered quality rare in the often restless, ambitious men of her own culture. "Nathaniel," she said softly, testing the name she had heard others calling him. "What does your name mean in your language?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something like appreciation for her interest. "Swift Deer," he replied. "But white traders call me Nathaniel Swift. Easier for them." Eleanor nodded, understanding the compromise inherent in his dual naming. "And me? What do your people call me?" Nathaniel's lips curved in a small smile. "Woman who fell from sky." Despite everything, Eleanor found herself laughing, a rusty sound after so many months of grief and fear. "That's surprisingly accurate." Nathaniel's smile deepened at her response. "Stories say first woman came to Earth that way, fell from stars." The parallel struck Eleanor as both beautiful and slightly unsettling. "And what will they call Liberty?" "Child of two worlds," he answered without hesitation. "Born to woman who fell from sky, delivered by Shawnee hands." The name carried a weight Eleanor felt in her chest, a recognition of Liberty's unique position, bridging cultures that rarely met in peace. It reminded her, too, of her own recently discovered heritage, the Cherokee blood that apparently flowed in her veins. On impulse, she touched the small mark on her shoulder. "Nathaniel, have you ever seen a birthmark like this?" She pulled the loose collar of her dress aside just enough to reveal the shape discoloration on her skin, a small pattern that resembled a feather. Nathaniel leaned closer, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more complex. "Where did you get this?" "I was born with it," Eleanor explained. "My mother called it an angel's kiss, but recently I've wondered if it might be something else." Nathaniel's gaze moved from the mark to her face, studying her features with new intensity. "This is Cherokee mark," he said finally, "sacred symbol given to those with special connection to spirits." Eleanor's breath caught. Cherokee? Are you certain? Yes, Shawnee and Cherokee, different tribes, but we trade, sometimes marry. I have seen this mark before on Cherokee medicine women. The confirmation sent Eleanor's thoughts spinning. Her mother's letter had hinted at Cherokee heritage, but this physical evidence made the connection undeniable, a heritage written on her skin, visible to those who knew how to read it. My mother recently told me her sister was Cherokee, Eleanor said softly. I never knew until after Thomas died. She wrote me a letter explaining that she had lived among the Cherokee for a time. Nathaniel nodded slowly as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. This explains much. Your spirit has old knowing in it. I felt this when we first met. The idea that Nathaniel had sensed something in her that she herself was only beginning to understand was both comforting and disconcerting. Who was she really? Eleanor Reed, the Virginia doctor's daughter? Thomas Reed's widow? Liberty's mother? Or something more complex, a woman with bloodlines that crossed the very boundaries white society fought so hard to maintain? Does this change things? She asked, suddenly anxious about how this revelation might affect her precarious position in the village. Nathaniel considered the question before answering. For some, yes. For me, he paused, seeming to search for the right words. It explains why Creator led me to find you, why your spirit called to mine through the storm. The simple statement hung in the air between them, layered with meanings Eleanor wasn't sure she was ready to explore. Before she could respond, Liberty stirred in her cradle, saving Eleanor from having to navigate emotions too complex for her exhausted mind and body. As Nathaniel rose to leave, he paused at the lodge entrance. Rest now, he said, his voice gentle. Tomorrow, if leg is strong enough, I show you more of our ways, things your Cherokee blood might remember, even if your mind is not. After he had gone, Eleanor lay awake, one hand resting lightly on Liberty's cradle, the other touching the mark on her shoulder that had suddenly transformed from a simple birthmark to a profound connection with a heritage she had never known was hers. Outside, the night sounds of the village gradually quieted as families settled into their lodges. A lone owl called from the forest edge, a sound Eleanor might once have found eerie, but now recognized as simply part of the night's natural rhythm. For the first time since Thomas's death, since the terrible moment of betrayal on the wagon trail, Eleanor felt the faintest stirring of something like hope. Not happiness, not yet. The pain and loss were still too fresh, the future too uncertain for that. But a sense that perhaps there was a path forward for her in Liberty that didn't end in destitution or dependence on the charity of strangers. As sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude, not just for her physical survival, but for the unexpected sanctuary that had welcomed her when her own family had cast her aside. Above her, the dream catcher swayed gently in the night breeze that filtered through the lodge's smoke hole, its web catching the moonlight like strands of silver. The day dawned clear and cool, with the first hints of autumn crispness in the air. Eleanor awoke feeling stronger than she had since Liberty's birth, the persistent ache in her leg dulled to a manageable discomfort. Gentle rain arrived early, bringing a breakfast of corn porridge sweetened with wild honey. She examined Eleanor's splinted leg with approval, then checked Liberty, whose tiny body had already begun to fill out despite her premature arrival. Good mother's milk, the elderly woman said in halting English, one of the few phrases she knew. She pointed to Eleanor's chest, then to Liberty, nodding with satisfaction. Through gestures and the few words they shared, gentle rain indicated that Eleanor could move about the village more freely today, provided she used the walking stick the medicine woman had carved for her. After breaking her fast and tending to Liberty, Eleanor ventured outside, the infant secured in her carrying sling. The village was already bustling with morning activities. Women grinding corn, men preparing for hunting expeditions, children carrying water from the stream. Eleanor made her way slowly toward the central clearing where she had arranged to meet Nathaniel. Each step was a careful negotiation between movement and pain, but the walking stick provided welcome support. She found Nathaniel waiting as promised, engaged in conversation with Morning Dove. The young mother smiled shyly at Eleanor's approach, touching Liberty's head in a gesture of blessing before continuing on her way. Good morning, and Eleanor greeted Nathaniel, pleased to see the flash of approval in his eyes at her improved mobility. Morning, and he replied with a nod. Leg better today? Much better, she confirmed. Gentle rain is a remarkable healer. Oldest wisdom, Nathaniel agreed. Come, today I show you plants that heal. Good for mother to know. He led her to the village edge, where cultivated gardens gave way to the wilder growth of the forest. Here, Nathaniel began a lesson that would have fascinated Eleanor's father, identifying medicinal plants, explaining their uses, demonstrating how to harvest them without destroying their ability to regrow. Eleanor absorbed his teachings eagerly, recognizing many of the plants from her father's medical reference books, but learning new applications from Nathaniel's indigenous knowledge. Some herbs she knew as treatments for fever were also used by the Shawnee to purify water. Others her father had prescribed for pain also served as basi or preservatives. This knowledge is invaluable, she said as they rested beneath the spreading branches of an oak. My father would have given anything to learn these remedies. Your father was healer? Nathaniel asked, interest sharpening his gaze. Eleanor nodded. A doctor, yes. He taught me what he could, though women aren't allowed formal medical training. I assisted him with his patients from the time I was 12. This explains your gentle hands with liberty, Nathaniel observed. Healer's touch. The compliment warmed Eleanor unexpectedly. I always wanted to learn more, but after father died, there was no one willing to teach a woman. Women are best healers, Nathaniel said matter-of-factly. More patient, better listeners. Gentle Rain says men rush too much, miss small signs. The assessment made Eleanor smile, remembering her father's frequent complaints about young male doctors who diagnosed before fully examining their patients. Their conversation was interrupted by Liberty's hungry cries. Without embarrassment, the Shawnee viewed breastfeeding as the most natural act imaginable. Eleanor adjusted her position to nurse the infant. Nathaniel respectfully averted his gaze, focusing on weaving the medicinal plants they had gathered into small bundles for drying. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. It was in this moment of quiet companionship that Eleanor truly noticed the peace she felt in Nathaniel's presence. With Thomas, conversation had always been a careful dance, her knowledge and intelligence carefully modulated to avoid threatening his sense of superiority. With Malcolm, every interaction had been a chess match, each word potentially revealing too much or too little. But with Nathaniel, silence itself held meaning. Words, when they came, served communication rather than concealment. It was refreshing in its simplicity, yet profound in its honesty. You have sad eyes sometimes, Nathaniel observed, breaking the silence. When you think no one watches. The unexpected perception startled Eleanor. I suppose I do have much to be sad about. Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. Sadness is like river, must flow to reach sea. Damming brings flood. The metaphor struck Eleanor as surprisingly apt. She had indeed been damming her grief, her fear, her anger, containing them tightly lest they overwhelm her. And you, she asked, turning the observation back to him. Your eyes hold sadness too. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face. Surprise, perhaps, that she had noticed, or that she had the courage to mention it. All who live long enough know sorrow, he said simply. It wasn't an answer, not really, but Eleanor sensed it was all he was prepared to offer for now. She respected his reticence, recognizing that trust, like healing, required time. As they walked back toward the village, Liberty now sleeping contentedly after her meal, Eleanor found herself wondering about the man beside her. What experiences had shaped him? What joys and sorrows had defined his life? The questions remained unasked, but they lingered in her mind on, adding depth to her growing understanding of this man who had saved not just her life, but her daughter's as well. That night, as a full moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the sleeping village, Eleanor stood outside Gentle Rain's lodge, breathing in the cool night air. Liberty slept peacefully within, exhausted from a day of new experiences. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the stars scattered across the velvet darkness above. The same stars would be visible from Virginia, from the Oregon Territory, from wherever Malcolm's wagon train now traveled. The thought gave her an odd sense of connection to all she had lost, all she had never known, and all that might yet be. A soft footfall alerted her to Nathaniel's approach. He appeared like a shadow from the darkness, moving with the silent grace that had first impressed her in the forest. Cannot sleep? He asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Eleanor shook her head. Too many thoughts. Nathaniel nodded, understanding. After a moment's hesitation, he gestured toward the forest edge. Moon is full. Good time for walking, if leg is not too tired. The invitation surprised her, but Eleanor found herself nodding. I'd like that. They moved slowly, accommodating Eleanor's still healing leg. Nathaniel led her to a small clearing by the stream where moonlight danced on the rippling water. Without speaking, he indicated a flat stone where she could sit comfortably. For a long while, they simply existed in the moonlit silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the eternal murmur of the stream. It was Nathaniel who finally broke the stillness, his voice so quiet Eleanor had to lean slightly closer to hear. I had wife once, he said, his gaze fixed on the moonlit water. Singing bird. 3 winters passed, fever took her. The simple statement held worlds of loss, and Eleanor's heart ached for him. I'm sorry, she said softly. Nathaniel acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. She was joy itself, voice like morning birds, laugh that made even elders smile. Eleanor remained silent, giving him space to share or not as he chose. No children, he continued after a moment. Great sorrow for us both. Many prayers, many medicines, but Creator had other path. Now Eleanor understood better the gentleness with which Nathaniel handled liberty, the quiet longing she sometimes caught in his gaze when he watched the infant sleep. Thomas and I tried for years before liberty, she offered, sharing her own struggle. The doctor said I might never conceive. Her existence feels like a miracle sometimes. Nathaniel turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. All children are miracles, he said simply. Proof that Creator still believes in us, despite our failings. The sentiment was so beautifully expressed that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, exactly that. They fell silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed, deepened somehow by the exchange of personal truths. In that moment, they were not Shawnee and settler, not rescuer and rescued, but simply 2 souls who had known loss and found unexpected connection in its aftermath. The moonlight bathed the clearing in ethereal silver, transforming the ordinary into something magical. Eleanor felt a strange peace settle over her, a sense that whatever challenges lay ahead, this moment of tranquility would remain a touchstone in her memory. Thank you, she said finally, for sharing that with me. About Singing Bird. Nathaniel nodded, understanding that her gratitude extended beyond his words to the trust they represented. Time to return, he said eventually, rising and offering his hand to help Eleanor stand. Little one will wake hungry soon. As they walked back toward the village, Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Nathaniel's presence beside her. His steady strength, his quiet dignity, the depth of spirit that had led him to rescue a strange woman in a storm despite every reason to turn away. In another life, another time, she might have permitted herself to wonder what could develop between them. But reality imposed its harsh boundaries. 2 weeks until she must leave for the trading post, cultural differences that seemed insurmountable, and the practical challenges of a woman alone with an infant in a world that offered little mercy to either. Still, as they reached Gentle Rain's lodge, Eleanor couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted between them. A deepening of understanding, a foundation of mutual respect that transcended their different worlds. Good night, Nathaniel, she said softly as they parted at the lodge entrance. Good dreams, Eleanor, he replied, using her given name for the first time. As she settled beside Liberty's cradle, Eleanor's thoughts returned to her mother's letter and the heritage she was only beginning to understand. Perhaps there was wisdom to be found in embracing both sides of her ancestry, the European and the Cherokee, rather than denying either. With that thought came another, more troubling realization. If Malcolm ever discovered her mixed heritage, it would give him yet another weapon to use against her claim to Thomas's land. In the eyes of many, her Cherokee blood, however distant, would make her less than fully human, unworthy of legal protection or property rights. The complexity of her situation weighed heavily as sleep finally claimed her. But above her, the dream catcher Nathaniel had given her swayed gently in the night breeze, its silent promise of protection following her into dreams where past and future, Cherokee and settler, loss and hope, intertwined in patterns too complex for waking mind to untangle. Morning arrived with birdsong and the soft murmur of the village coming to life. Eleanor woke to find Liberty already awake, her tiny fists waving in the air as she studied the patterns of light filtering through the lodge's smoke hole. The sight filled Eleanor with a tenderness so acute it bordered on pain. This miraculous child, born in such extraordinary circumstances, now thriving despite everything that should have worked against her survival. "Good morning, little one," Eleanor whispered, gathering Liberty into her arms. "Another day in our strange new world." As she nursed the infant, Eleanor's thoughts returned to the previous night's conversation with Nathaniel, his revelation about Singing Bird, the wife he had lost, and the children they had longed for but never conceived. The shared confidences had shifted something between them, creating a deeper understanding that transcended their cultural differences. Gentle rain entered the lodge, bringing with her the scent of pine and herbs. The elderly healer's weathered face creased in a smile at the sight of mother and child. "Good," she said in her limited English, pointing to Liberty. "Strong milk, strong baby." Through gestures and the few shared words they had established, gentle rain indicated it was time to change Eleanor's splint. The healing progress continued to impress the medicine woman, who nodded approvingly as she examined the leg. "Walk more today," she instructed, demonstrating with waving her fingers. "Good for blood, good for strength." Eleanor nodded her understanding. "Thank you, gentle rain, for everything." Though the older woman might not have understood the specific words, she clearly recognized the gratitude behind them. She patted Eleanor's hand in a gesture that needed no translation before gathering her supplies and departing. Alone again with Liberty, Eleanor carefully dressed in the buckskin garments Morning Dove had provided, clothing far more practical for her current circumstances than her ruined settler dress had been. The soft, supple material moved with her body rather than restricting it, and the design cleverly accommodated nursing without the complicated layers of her previous attire. Once Liberty was fed and wrapped securely in her carrying sling, Eleanor ventured outside. The morning air carried a hint of wood smoke and cooking food, making her suddenly aware of her hunger. She made her way toward the central fire, where several women were preparing the day's first meal. Morning Dove spotted her and waved in welcome, indicating a place on the woven mat where other women sat. Eleanor joined them, grateful for the inclusion despite the curious glances and whispered comments she couldn't understand. A wooden bowl of fragrant stew was placed in her hands, a mixture of corn, beans, and what appeared to be venison. The flavors were different from what she was accustomed to, more complex with unfamiliar herbs, but satisfying in their heartiness. As she ate, Eleanor observed the interactions around her. Unlike meals in her own culture, where women often served men first and ate separately, here the community shared food together, with elders given places of honor. Children darted between adults, receiving affectionate touches and morsels of food from many hands. A village raising its young together rather than isolating child rearing within individual families. "You slept well?" The question came from Nathaniel, who had approached quietly and now crouched beside her. Eleanor nodded. "Better than I have in months." Something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Good. Today, if you are strong enough, there is more I would show you." His gaze dropped to Liberty, who had fallen asleep in her sling. "Little one can stay with Morning Dove, if you wish. Her son sleeps much now. She has time." The suggestion startled Eleanor. She hadn't been separated from Liberty since the birth and felt an immediate resistance to the idea. Yet she recognized the practicality of it, especially if Nathaniel intended to take her further from the village than before. Morning Dove, sensing the topic of conversation, approached with a gentle smile. "I keep safe," she said in careful English, gesturing to Liberty and then to her own infant son, who slept nearby in an intricately woven carrier. "You go, learn." The simple offer of help, with no expectation of return, touched Eleanor deeply. In her experience, assistance always came with obligations, spoken or unspoken. Yet here was a woman who had every reason to distrust her, offering to care for her most precious possession simply because it was needed. "Thank you," Eleanor said, carefully transferring the sleeping Liberty to Morning Dove's capable arms. "I won't be gone long." Morning Dove nodded understanding, settling Liberty beside her own son with practiced ease. The sight of the two infants, one pale as dawn, one brown as earth, sleeping peacefully, side by side, created an image of innocence and possibility that brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. Nathaniel waited patiently, observing the exchange without comment. When Eleanor turned to him, he simply nodded and led the way toward the forest edge. Their path took them higher into the surrounding hills, following game trails that wound through stands of oak and hickory. Nathaniel set a pace that challenged Eleanor's healing leg without overtaxing it, occasionally offering his arm for support when the terrain grew particularly steep. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked as they paused to rest by a small spring. "Sacred place," Nathaniel replied, "place of seeing." The cryptic answer raised more questions than it answered, but Eleanor sensed this was intentional. Some things, perhaps, needed to be experienced rather than explained. As they climbed higher, the forest opened occasionally to reveal breathtaking vistas of the valley below. The Shawnee village appeared as a small, harmonious collection of dwellings nestled within the protective embrace of the mountains. Beyond it, the landscape rolled away in waves of green and gold, forested giving way to meadows, then rising again to distant ridges blue with haze. Finally, they reached what appeared to be their destination, a flat shelf of rock jutting from the mountainside, creating a natural overlook. Ancient trees grew along its edges, their gnarled roots embracing the stone as if they had grown from it rather than merely alongside it. Nathaniel gestured for Eleanor to sit on a sun-warmed boulder, then settled cross-legged nearby. For a long moment, he simply gazed out at the panoramic view, his expression contemplative. "My grandfather brought me here when I was a boy," he said finally. "Said this place helps see with clear eyes. Not just with these," he touched his fingers to his eyes, "but with this." His hand moved to rest over his heart. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Even she could feel something different about this place. A stillness, a presence that seemed to demand honesty from those who entered it. "Look there," Nathaniel said, pointing eastward toward a distant ribbon of lighter green winding through the forest. "River where your wagon train crossed. Beyond, your people build new settlements each season. More coming always." He shifted his finger to indicate another direction. "Their Three Sons Journey, trading post where white trappers and our people sometimes meet to exchange goods." His hand swept in a wider arc. "All this land, once Shawnee hunting ground. Now each year, smaller, smaller. Soon nowhere for deer, for bear, for wolf. Nowhere for Shawnee." The sorrow in his voice was unmistakable. Not bitter, but deeply felt, like mourning for a loved one whose passing was slow, but inevitable. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly, the words wholly inadequate for the scale of what he described. Nathaniel acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Not your doing, but important you understand. The world Liberty enters has two faces, one white, one red. Both shape her path." He fell silent then, allowing Eleanor to absorb the vast landscape and its implications. From this vantage point, oh no, she could see what he meant about the encroachment of settlement. Even in the distance, she spotted what appeared to be a newly cleared area where the forest had been cut back to make way for farms or homesteads. "There is more," Nathaniel said after a while, his voice taking on a new gravity. "Thing you should know." Eleanor turned to him, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. 3 days passed, hunters saw men searching near river. White men, 3, with guns. One matches description of your brother by marriage. The news struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "Malcolm here? But how could he know I survived?" Nathaniel shook his head. Not know, perhaps, but suspicious enough to search, or, he hesitated. Or what? Or values land claim enough to make certain. The implications sent a chill through Eleanor despite the warm sun. Malcolm, unwilling to leave even the slightest possibility that she had survived, was searching the area to eliminate any loose ends. "He can't find me here," she said, trying to reassure herself as much as Nathaniel. "The village is well hidden." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, "but changes things. Makes journey to trading post more dangerous. Chief Silver Fox must know." Eleanor's mind raced with implications. If Malcolm was actively searching the area, her options narrowed considerably. The trading post, which had seemed a logical next step, now represented a potential trap. "What will happen?" she asked, unconsciously pressing her hand to her heart, which had begun to pound with renewed anxiety. Nathaniel's expression remained calm, steadying. "Council will decide, but you and Liberty safe until then. This I promise." The simple vow carried more weight than elaborate assurances might have. Eleanor believed him, Not just because she wanted to, but because everything she had learned about this man told her his word, once given, was unbreakable. They remained at the Overlook a while longer, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as Nathaniel pointed out features of the landscape and shared stories of his childhood explorations. By the time they began their descent, Eleanor's anxiety had eased somewhat, replaced by a kind of resigned determination. She had survived betrayal, a near-fatal fall, childbirth in extraordinary circumstances. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience. As they neared the village, however, Eleanor sensed something was wrong. There was an unusual stillness, a tension in the air that hadn't been present when they left. Nathaniel felt it too. His posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert, one hand moving to rest on the knife at his belt. They entered the village to find most of its inhabitants gathered in the central clearing. At the center stood Chief Silver Fox and a man Eleanor had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with skin weathered by years in the elements. His clothing was a curious blend of settler and native styles. Buckskin trousers, a faded cotton shirt, moccasins instead of boots. Beside him stood a woman whose appearance momentarily stunned Eleanor. Clearly of native descent, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. She wore a simple dress of settler design, her dark hair arranged in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. A small silver cross hung at her throat. Nathaniel's hand touched Eleanor's elbow briefly, a gesture of reassurance before he moved forward to join the gathering. Eleanor followed more slowly, conscious of the many eyes that turned in her direction. Chief Silver Fox spoke rapidly to Nathaniel, who listened intently before turning to Eleanor. "This is James McAllister," he explained, indicating the tall man, trader from Post 3 Days' Journey. With him, his wife Hannah. James McAllister studied Eleanor with keen blue eyes that missed nothing. "Well now," he said, his voice carrying a hint of a Scottish accent. "When Broken Arrow here said a white woman had given birth in the Shawnee village, I thought he might have been sampling his own whiskey. Seems the old coot was sober after all." Hannah McAllister stepped forward, her dark eyes moving from Eleanor to the empty carrying sling. "Your child?" she asked, a note of concern in her voice. "With Morning Dove," Eleanor hastened to explain. "She's well." Relief softened Hannah's expression. "Good. Children are precious gifts, especially in such troubled times." There was something in the woman's manner, a gentleness combined with quiet strength, that immediately put Eleanor at ease. Despite their different backgrounds, she sensed a kindred spirit in Hannah McAllister. Silver Fox spoke again, addressing both Nathaniel and the traders. Nathaniel translated for Eleanor's benefit. "Chief asks why McAllister comes now without usual trading goods." James's expression grew serious. "Tell him I came to warn, not to trade. There are men searching the area, armed men offering gold for information about a woman they claim wandered from their wagon train in a fit of pregnancy madness." Eleanor's breath caught. "Malcolm." James turned his sharp gaze on her. "That would be your brother-in-law, I take it? The one Nathaniel here says pushed you from a wagon and left you for dead?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "He wants my husband's land claim. With me gone, he believes he can claim it as Thomas's only living male relative. Seems a mite excessive, pushing a pregnant woman off a wagon for a piece of paper," James observed dryly. "It's not just any land," Eleanor explained. 800 acres in Oregon Territory, with water rights, worth a small fortune now and potentially much more in the future. She hesitated, then decided these people deserved the full truth. Thomas discovered there might be oil beneath the property. He kept it quiet, but he told me before he died. I believe Malcolm somehow found out. James whistled low. "Well now, that would explain the enthusiasm of the search. Your brother-in-law came to my trading post 2 days ago, offering $50 in gold to anyone with information about you. Said you were delicate in the mind after your husband's death and needed to be returned to your family's care. The sum was staggering, enough to tempt even honest men in this frontier economy. Did anyone take him up on it?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. "Not yet," James replied, "but he's still in the area and word travels. That's why I came to warn Silver Fox. If this Malcolm finds out the Shawnee sheltered you, it could go badly for everyone." The chief spoke again, his weathered face grave. Nathaniel translated, though Eleanor was beginning to recognize some Shawnee words on her own. Chief asks if trading post would be safe place for woman and child. James and Hannah exchanged a look before James answered. Safer than here, perhaps, but not safe enough if this Malcolm is as determined as he seems. He and his men are staying at the post now, using it as a base for their search. Hannah touched her husband's arm, saying something too quiet for Eleanor to hear. James nodded before addressing the chief again. My wife suggests that when the woman is strong enough to travel, we take her to Fort Williams. It's 10 days' journey from here, but large enough that she could disappear into it. This Malcolm would have no reason to search there if he believes she perished in these mountains. The suggestion was logical, yet Eleanor felt a strange reluctance at the thought of traveling so far from the place and people who had saved her. Fort Williams represented a return to the settler world that had already betrayed her once. Before anyone could respond, a commotion at the edge of the gathering drew their attention. Morning Dove approached, Liberty wailing in her arms. The infant's cries carried a desperation that Eleanor recognized immediately. Hunger, and something more. Distress. Eleanor moved to meet her, taking Liberty into her arms. The moment the child was against her chest, Eleanor sensed something was wrong. Liberty's skin felt too warm, her cries too weak for their volume. She burns, Morning Dove said anxiously. Started just now, very fast. Gentle Rain appeared at Eleanor's side, her experienced hands already reaching for the infant. The medicine woman's expression grew concerned as she felt Liberty's forehead. Inside, she instructed, gesturing toward her lodge. Now. The seriousness in her tone sent fear coursing through Eleanor. She followed Gentle Rain, vaguely aware of Nathaniel and the McAllisters behind her, while the rest of the village remained in the clearing with their chief. Inside the lodge, Gentle Rain directed Eleanor to lay Liberty on a prepared bed of soft furs. The infant's cries had weakened to whimpers, her tiny face flushed with fever. How long? The medicine woman asked through Nathaniel. She was fine when I left her with Morning Dove, Eleanor replied, her voice tight with anxiety. That was perhaps 3 hours ago. Gentle Rain nodded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she examined the child. She spoke rapidly to Nathaniel, who translated. She says fever came very fast. Could be many things. Milk sickness, lung shadow, or... He hesitated. Or what? Eleanor demanded. Or child fever. Sickness that sometimes takes little ones quickly. Child fever. Infantile sepsis. Eleanor had seen it during her time assisting her father, a swift, often fatal infection that could claim a newborn in hours. Terror gripped her heart. No, she whispered. Please, no. Gentle Rain was already moving about the lodge, gathering herbs and medicines with the focus of a woman who had faced this enemy before and sometimes prevailed. She barked instructions that Nathaniel translated for Eleanor. Need cool water, need willow bark, need prayer. Hannah McAllister stepped forward. I know something of healing, she said quietly. My mother was medicine woman to our Cherokee band before the removal. May I help? Gentle Rain studied the younger woman briefly before nodding. Together they began preparing a poultice while Nathaniel fetched fresh water from the stream. Eleanor sat beside Liberty, one hand gently stroking the infant's feverish brow. Stay with me, little one, she murmured. Please stay with me. We've come too far together to part now. James McAllister stood awkwardly near the lodge entrance, clearly uncertain of his place in this intensely female domain, but unwilling to leave. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Eleanor glanced up, momentarily surprised by his presence. Pray, she said simply, if you're a praying man. That I am, ma'am, he replied, removing his hat. That I am. The next hours blurred into a desperate vigil as Gentle Rain and Hannah worked to break Liberty's fever. They applied poultices, administered herbal teas drop by tiny drop, bathed the infant's small body in tepid water. Eleanor assisted where she could, but mostly she held her daughter, whispering encouragement and love into the tiny ear, as if her words alone could tether Liberty to the world of the living. Outside, the village continued its daily rhythms, but with a subdued quality that suggested awareness of the drama unfolding in the medicine woman's lodge. Occasionally, Eleanor caught glimpses of faces peering in. Morning Dove's eyes wide with concern, River Song watching from a distance with an expression Eleanor couldn't interpret. Silver Fox himself stopping briefly to speak with Nathaniel in low tones. Through it all, Nathaniel remained a steady presence, fetching what was needed, translating when necessary, and offering silent support that Eleanor found herself leaning on more than she had expected. There was something profoundly comforting about his calm certainty, his refusal to give in to the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. As dusk fell, Liberty's fever still raged. The infant had grown listless, her earlier cries fading to occasional whimpers that tore at Eleanor's heart. Gentle Rain and Hannah continued their ministrations with grim determination, their faces showing the strain of hours of intensive care. Will she? Eleanor couldn't finish the question, the words sticking in her throat. Hannah met her gaze steadily. She fights, she said simply, as her mother fought to bring her into this world. Now we must all fight with her. James had departed to speak with Silver Fox about their immediate plans, given the new circumstances. Nathaniel had gone to gather more willow bark and other herbs Gentle Rain required. Eleanor found herself alone with the two women who were fighting so hard to save her child. I can't lose her, she whispered, more to herself than to them. She's all I have left. Hannah placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Not all, she said softly. You have found friends here, people who see your spirit, not just your skin. The simple truth of this statement struck Eleanor forcefully. Yes, she had found something she hadn't expected in this place. Acceptance, kindness, a sense of belonging that had eluded her even in the world she had come from. As the night deepened, exhaustion began to claim Eleanor. Despite her determination to remain awake, to witness every moment of Liberty's struggle, her body eventually betrayed her. She drifted into a fitful doze. Liberty clutched securely against her chest. Her dreams were fragmented, disturbing. Images of Malcolm's face twisted in rage, of Thomas lying pale and still, of Liberty slipping away like mist through her grasping fingers. Then, breaking through these nightmare visions, came another image. Her mother and a woman Eleanor had never seen but somehow knew was White Feather, her Cherokee aunt. The two women stood side by side, their hands extended toward Liberty as if in blessing. She carries both our bloodlines, White Feather seemed to say, though no words were actually spoken. Two rivers flowing as one. Such strength is rare and needed in the world to come. Eleanor jolted awake, her heart pounding. Liberty still lay against her chest, but something had changed. The infant's body no longer burned with fever, but felt cool, too cool. No, Eleanor gasped, fear clutching at her throat. No, please. Hannah was beside her instantly, experienced hands checking the child. A slow smile spread across her face. The fever has broken, she said. Look, she sleeps naturally now. Sure enough, Liberty's breathing had steadied, her tiny features relaxed in normal sleep rather than the tense stillness of illness. Gentle Rain approached, her weathered fingers confirming Hannah's assessment before she nodded in satisfaction. Strong spirit, as she said in her limited English. Like mother. Relief washed over Eleanor in a wave so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what these women had done. Thank you both. Hannah smiled, the exhaustion of the long night evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. We women must help each other, she said simply. The world gives us burden enough without facing it alone. Gentle Rain spoke at length, gesturing toward Liberty and then to Eleanor. Hannah, who seemed to understand some Shawnee, translated. She says the child will need its special attention for several days. Her strength must rebuild slowly. And you, she touched Eleanor's hand, must rest too. You cannot care for her if you fall ill yourself. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in this advice. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, she felt the bone-deep weariness that came from hours of fear and vigilance. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the lodge's smoke hole when Nathaniel returned. His expression lightened visibly when he saw Liberty sleeping peacefully in Eleanor's arms. Fever broke, Eleanor confirmed, a weary smile touching her lips. She's going to be all right. Relief washed over Nathaniel's features, followed by something deeper, a tenderness that caught at Eleanor's heart. Strong daughter, he said softly, like mother. The echo of Gentle Rain's words from a different source made Eleanor wonder if there was a Shawnee saying to that effect. Before she could ask, James McAllister entered the lodge, his tall frame having to duck beneath the entrance. Good news about the little one, he said, nodding toward Liberty. Tough as a pine knot, just like her ma, I'd wager. Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor found herself warming to the trader's bluff manner. There was an honesty about him that reminded her of her father. Straightforward, without the veneer of false politeness that had characterized so many of the gentlemen she had known in Virginia. "I've been speaking with Silver Fox," James continued, settling on his haunches near the lodge entrance. "Given the situation with your brother-in-law and the little one's health, we've agreed it's best if you remain here until the child is stronger. Hannah and I will return to the trading post to keep an eye on Malcolm's movements." He glanced at his wife, who nodded agreement. "We'll spread word that we've seen sign of a woman's body downstream, enough to make him think his original plan succeeded. With any luck, he'll give up the search and move on." The strategy was sound, yet Eleanor felt a stab of anxiety at the thought of the McAllisters leaving. Despite having just met them, she had formed an immediate connection with Hannah in particular, perhaps because of their shared experience caring for Liberty through the night, or perhaps because of some deeper recognition between women who had found their places between worlds. "When will you go?" she asked. "Today," James replied. "Best not to leave the post untended too long, especially with your brother-in-law asking questions. But we'll return in 2 weeks' time to check on you and the little one. By then, we can decide whether it's safe to move you to Fort Williams." Hannah rose and moved to her husband's side. "I've left medicines with gentle rain," she told Eleanor, "and instructions for their use. Liberty should recover fully, but she'll need careful watching." "I don't know how to thank you," Eleanor said, meeting Hannah's dark eyes, "for everything." A smile softened Hannah's features. No thanks needed between women who understand each other. She hesitated, then added, "There's something about you that seems familiar to me, though I can't place it. Perhaps when we return, we'll have time to speak more of our families." The comment stirred something in Eleanor's memory. Her mother's letter, the revelation of Cherokee heritage, the birthmark on her shoulder that Nathaniel had recognized. Could there be some connection between her unknown Aunt Whitefeather and this Cherokee woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life? Before she could frame a question, Liberty stirred against her chest, whimpering softly. The infant's immediate needs took precedence over historical mysteries, and Eleanor turned her attention to her daughter. After the McAllisters had gone to prepare for their departure, Nathaniel remained, his presence a quiet comfort in the lodge. "You should rest," he said, noting Eleanor's exhaustion. "I will watch over you both." Under normal circumstances, Eleanor might have protested, insisted she was fine, needed no assistance. But the night's ordeal had drained her last reserves. She nodded gratefully, settling onto the bed of furs with Liberty securely beside her. "Wake me if she seems worse," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "I will," Nathaniel promised. "Rest now, both safe." As consciousness faded, Eleanor was vaguely aware of Nathaniel settling cross-legged near the lodge entrance, his watchful presence a shield between her and the world outside. Her last coherent thought was that she had never felt safer than in this place so far from everything she had once called home. Eleanor slept deeply, dreamlessly, for hours. When she finally woke, the light filtering through the smoke hole told her it was late afternoon. Liberty still slept beside her tiny chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of healing sleep. Gentle rain sat nearby, grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle. She looked up as Eleanor stirred, offering a nod of greeting. "How long?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to indicate she meant how long she had slept. Gentle rain held up her hands, fingers spread, then closed and reopened them once more. 10 hours. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she had slept so long, even before Liberty's birth. "McAllisters?" she inquired, wondering if they had already departed. "Gone," Gentle Rain confirmed. "Will return when moon is full again." The medicine woman's English, Eleanor realized, was better than she had initially let on, limited but functional for basic communication. Liberty began to stir, her small face scrunching in the universal expression of a hungry infant. Eleanor lifted her daughter, checking her temperature with a mother's instinct. The fever had not returned. A good sign. As Liberty nursed, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Just hours ago, she had faced the very real possibility of losing this precious child who had already survived against such tremendous odds. Now, feeling the strong pull of Liberty's mouth at her breast, seeing the healthy pink return to her cheeks, Eleanor allowed herself to acknowledge how close they had come to tragedy. Thank you, she said to Gentle Rain, who continued her work with the herbs, for saving her. The older woman looked up, her eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. Not me alone, she replied. Many hands, many prayers. She gestured toward the lodge entrance. Him too. Prayed all night, no sleep. Eleanor followed her gaze but saw only the empty entrance. Nathaniel? Gentle Rain nodded. Good man, sad heart since wife died, but good heart. The simple assessment matched Eleanor's own impressions, yet hearing it from someone who had known Nathaniel his entire life gave it additional weight. He told me about Singing Bird, she said quietly, about their sorrow over having no children. Gentle Rain's hands stilled in their work. He told you this? There was surprise in her voice. Nathaniel speaks little of heart pain. To anyone. The revelation that Nathaniel had shared something so personal with her, something he apparently kept private even among his own people, gave Eleanor pause. What did it mean that he had opened that wound to her? A virtual stranger? Before she could pursue this line of thought, River Song appeared at the lodge entrance. The young warrior's expression was as closed and hostile as ever, but there was something different in his demeanor, a reluctant respect, perhaps, or simply a suspension of his previous judgment. He spoke rapidly to Gentle Rain, who responded with a nod before turning to Eleanor. Chief calls counsel, she explained. Wants you there. Child too. The summons was unexpected and slightly alarming. Wei, Eleanor asked. Has something happened? Gentle Rain shook her head. Not bad thing. Important talk only. Nathaniel will explain. Riversong waited impatiently as Eleanor finished nursing Liberty and prepared to leave the lodge. Her legs, she noted with surprise, felt significantly better after her long rest, still tender, but bearing her weight with only minimal discomfort. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village clearing. Most of the community had already gathered near the central fire, where Chief Silver Fox sat with the other elders. Nathaniel stood nearby, deep in conversation with an older warrior Eleanor had come to know as Strong Water. Riversong led Eleanor to a place near the front of the gathering, where a woven mat had been laid out for her. The consideration of this gesture, allowing her to sit comfortably with her healing leg, touched Eleanor unexpectedly. As she settled onto the mat with Liberty cradled in her arms, Nathaniel approached. Chief wishes to speak of your future, he explained, his voice low. McAllister's plan has made him think of other possibilities. What kind of possibilities? Eleanor asked, a flutter of anxiety stirring in her chest. Before Nathaniel could answer, Silver Fox raised his hand for silence. The gathered villagers immediately quieted, their attention focused on their chief. What followed was a lengthy address in Shawnee, delivered with the measured cadence of formal oratory. Eleanor caught occasional words she recognized, her name, Liberty's, Nathaniel's, references to the McAllisters and the trading post. But the substance of the chief's speech remained beyond her grasp. She watched the reactions of those around her for clues. Some nodded in agreement. Others, particularly Riversong and a few of the younger warriors, frowned or shifted uncomfortably. The elders remained impassive, their weathered faces revealing nothing of their thoughts. Finally, Silver Fox turned his gaze directly to Eleanor. Through Nathaniel, he addressed her formally. Woman who fell from sky, Nathaniel translated, using the name the Shawnee had given her. You came to us through strange fate. Your child was born on our land, under our care. This creates a bond not easily broken. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging this truth. We have learned from the trader McAllister that your brother by marriage continues to search for you with ill intent. To send you to the trading post, or even to Fort Williams, might place you and your child in his path. Again, Eleanor nodded, her arms tightening instinctively around Liberty. Therefore, I propose a different path. Remain with us until the cold moons have passed. Learn our ways, contribute your skills to our village. When spring returns and your brother by marriage has surely given up his search, we will help you decide your next journey. The proposal stunned Eleanor. Winter in the Shawnee village? Months rather than weeks? It was both terrifying and oddly appealing. A chance to truly heal, to learn, to find her footing in this new life before facing the broader world again. The choice is yours, Nathaniel continued translating. But know that if you stay, you will be expected to live as Shawnee, to learn our language, to follow our customs, to contribute to our community according to your abilities. Eleanor's mind raced with implications. Could she truly adapt to life so different from everything she had known? Would she be accepted beyond the initial hospitality the village had shown? And what of liberty? What would it mean for her daughter to spend her earliest months in a culture so removed from the one Eleanor herself had been raised in? Yet, as her gaze moved around the gathering, Eleanor realized she had already begun to see these people as individuals, rather than as the faceless Indians of settler fears and prejudices. Morning Dove with her gentle smile, Strong Water with his quiet dignity, Gentle Rain with her healing wisdom, and Nathaniel, the man who had saved her life, who had shared his deepest sorrow with her, who had watched over her in liberty through the long night of fever. "I am honored by your offer," she said finally, Nathaniel translating her words into Shawnee, "and grateful for the sanctuary you have already provided. If you will teach me, I will learn. If you will guide me, I will contribute whatever skills I possess." A murmur ran through the gathering, not disapproval, Eleanor thought, but surprise at her ready acceptance. Silver Fox nodded, a glint of approval in his dark eyes. "It is decided," he declared through Nathaniel. "Until the snow melts, woman who fell from sky and child of two worlds will dwell among the Shawnee. Morning Dove will share her lodge with them, teaching our ways and language. In return, the woman will share her healing knowledge with Gentle Rain and help with women's work." The formal declaration seemed to conclude the council. People began to rise, breaking into smaller conversations as they dispersed. Eleanor remained seated, slightly overwhelmed by the decision she had just made and its implications for her future. Nathaniel crouched beside her. "You are certain?" he asked quietly. "Winter in mountains not easy, different from life you knew." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "The life I knew ended the moment Malcolm pushed me from that wagon," she said. "Perhaps even before, when Thomas died. I need to build something new for liberty and myself. Here, at least, I know we're safe." Nathaniel studied her face as if searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. He nodded once, decisively. "Then I will help you learn," he said simply. "Both of you." The promise held more meaning than its straightforward words might suggest. Eleanor sensed that Nathaniel was offering not just practical assistance, but a kind of cultural translation, a bridge between the world she had come from and the one she was entering. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." A hint of a smile touched his lips. No thanks needed between friends. Friends. The word warmed Eleanor unexpectedly. Yes, they had become that, hadn't they? Despite their different backgrounds, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting, a genuine friendship had formed, one based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than social convention. As the sun began to set, casting the village in golden light, Morning Dove approached with her son strapped to her back. She smiled at Eleanor, gesturing toward her lodge on the village's eastern edge. "Come," she said in her limited English. "New home now." Eleanor rose, adjusting Liberty in her arms. The infant had fallen asleep again, her small face peaceful in a way that eased the lingering fear in Eleanor's heart after the night's crisis. Nathaniel walked with them to Morning Dove's dwelling, a spacious lodge larger than Gentle Rain's, with evidence of a child's presence in the small toys and folded carriers visible inside. "Morning Dove's husband is Strongwater's son," Nathaniel explained as they approached. "He hunts in northern valleys now. Returns in 10 days. Eleanor nodded, understanding that she would essentially be Morning Dove's guest until the husband returned. It was a generous arrangement, especially given the limited space in most dwellings. "Will he mind?" she asked, concerned about imposing on a man who had no say in the matter. "Black Hawk is good man," Nathaniel assured her, "values Chief's wisdom," and he added with a slight smile, "Morning Dove's happiness. She has been lonely since her sister left to marry into Cloudban last spring." This glimpse into the personal dynamics of the village reminded Eleanor that despite their cultural differences, the Shawnee experienced the same basic human emotions and relationships as anyone else. Friendship, loneliness, family bonds, marital negotiations. It was a simple realization, but one that helped ease her anxiety about the months ahead. Morning Dove showed Eleanor where she and Liberty would sleep, a comfortable area near the lodge's back wall, with fresh furs and blankets already arranged. A small cradle board, intricately decorated with beadwork, stood ready for Liberty. "For baby," Morning Dove said proudly, indicating the cradle. "My hands make." The gift represented hours of skilled labor, freely given to welcome a child not of her blood or people. It epitomized the generosity Eleanor had encountered repeatedly among the Shawnee, a willingness to share resources and skills that stood in stark contrast to the brutal calculation that had led Malcolm to cast her aside for material gain. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, genuinely moved. "Thank you." As Nathaniel prepared to leave them to settle in, Eleanor was struck by a sudden thought. "Nathaniel," she called as he reached the lodge entrance. "The council, was it your suggestion that I stay through the winter?" He paused, turning back to face her. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read, but something in his posture suggested the question had caught him off guard. "Chief Silver Fox has wisdom beyond my small thoughts," he said carefully. "But yes, I spoke of possibility. After seeing Liberty's fever, new journey now would be dangerous, and—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Thought perhaps you might find healing here, for body, for spirit." The simple admission revealed more of his character, his thoughtfulness, his concern not just for their physical safety, but for their emotional well-being. Eleanor found herself deeply touched by this consideration. "I think we might," she said softly. "Thank you for suggesting it." Nathaniel acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow, new learning begins." As he departed, Eleanor turned to find Morning Dove watching her with a knowing expression that transcended language barriers. The young mother said something in Shawnee that Eleanor couldn't understand, but the gentle teasing in her tone was unmistakable. Eleanor raised an eyebrow questioningly, and Morning Dove laughed, making a gesture that seemed to connect Eleanor and the departed Nathaniel. Though the specific meaning escaped her, Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Apparently, some things were universally recognizable across cultures, including the beginning of feelings that went beyond simple friendship. Turning her attention to settling Liberty in her new cradleboard, Eleanor pushed those thoughts aside. Her focus now had to be on learning to survive in this new environment, on healing completely, on protecting her daughter from both immediate threats like illness and longer-term ones like Malcolm's persistent search. Yet as night fell over the Shawnee village and Eleanor prepared for sleep in her new dwelling, she found herself wondering what the coming months might bring, not just in terms of practical skills and cultural adaptation, but in her growing connection to the man who had saved her life and now seemed determined to help her build a new one. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack, the haunting sound echoing through the valleys. Inside the lodge, Liberty slept peacefully in her beautifully crafted cradle, while Morning Dove hummed a soft lullaby to her own son. For the first time since Thomas's death, Eleanor felt something like peace settle over her. Not happiness, not yet, but a sense that perhaps happiness might eventually be possible again. Here in this place so far from everything she had once known, she had found something unexpected: acceptance, purpose, and the fragile beginnings of belonging. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new learning, new adaptations to a way of life utterly foreign to her previous experience. But tonight, at least, Eleanor allowed herself to simply exist in this moment of quiet possibility, grateful for the sanctuary that had welcomed her when her own world had cast her aside. The days that followed established a rhythm that helped anchor Eleanor in her new life. Each morning began with communal breakfast around the central fires, where she gradually learned to recognize more Shawnee words and phrases through Morning Dove's patient tutoring. The village women, initially wary, began to include Eleanor in their daily tasks, showing her how to prepare hides, identify and gather useful plants, weave baskets from river reeds. Her initially clumsy attempts were met with patient correction rather than mockery, each small improvement celebrated as meaningful progress. Liberty thrived in this communal environment, passed happily from one set of experienced arms to another as Eleanor worked. What might have seemed intrusive in settler society felt natural here, where children were considered a shared blessing rather than private property. The infant's distinctive coloring and fair skin drew gentle touches of curiosity but no rejection. Gentle Rain took particular interest in Eleanor's healing leg, applying poultices and performing manipulation exercises that gradually restored more normal function. Though a slight limp remained, the pain diminished steadily under the elder's care. Evenings often found Eleanor sitting with Mourning Dove and other women near the central fire, struggling to master the basics of Shawnee language while they practiced the English words she taught in return. These exchanges frequently dissolved into laughter as both sides mangled pronunciation, but real communication grew from these imperfect efforts. Nathaniel maintained a respectful distance during these early days, visiting regularly to check on Eleanor and Liberty's well-being but carefully observing the boundaries of propriety. His role shifted gradually from protector to teacher, introducing Eleanor to the forest surrounding the village with the same patience he showed Liberty when the growing infant grasped at his fingers with determined curiosity. "You learn quickly," he observed one afternoon as they returned from gathering medicinal plants. "Most white people see only trees, miss all that grows beneath." Eleanor smiled at the compliment. "I've had an excellent teacher, and I've always been curious about the natural world. My father encouraged it, even when others thought it inappropriate for a young lady to show interest in such things." "Your father was wise man," Nathaniel replied. "Curiosity is gift from Creator. Shows respect for all he has made." This perspective, that learning about nature was an act of spiritual reverence rather than mere academic interest, resonated deeply with Eleanor. She had always felt closest to God, or whatever name one gave the divine, when surrounded by the natural world rather than within church walls. As they neared the village, Nathaniel paused, his expression growing more serious. "Tomorrow I go with hunting party," he said. "5 days, maybe 6. Northern valleys have elk this season." The news surprised Eleanor more than it should have. Of course, Nathaniel had responsibilities beyond helping her adjust to Shawnee life. He was, after all, one of the band's primary hunters. Still, she felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his absence. "I'll continue practicing what you've taught me," she assured him, keeping her tone light. "Perhaps by the time you return, I'll be able to identify plants without pointing at them and saying that one in English." Nathaniel's lips curved in a rare full smile that transformed his normally reserved features. "Already you know more than most. Trust what your eyes see, what your hands feel. Plants speak if we listen." They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. As they reached the edge of the village, children ran to meet them, eager to see what they had gathered. Among them was River Song's younger brother, a solemn boy of perhaps 10 winters, who had initially avoided Eleanor, but now approached with cautious curiosity. "What is this?" he asked in Shawnee, pointing to a plant in Eleanor's basket. Eleanor recognized the word for "what" in the questioning tone. Drawing on the vocabulary she had been studying, she responded carefully in his language. "Medicine plant, for fever." The boy's eyes widened in surprise at her use of Shawnee, then narrowed in concentration as he studied the plant. "My mother uses this," he said, speaking slowly so she might understand, "when stomach pains come." Eleanor nodded, pleased both by the communication and the new information about the plant's uses. "Good medicine," she agreed in her limited Shawnee. "Many uses." The brief exchange felt like a small victory, a genuine connection across the cultural divide that separated them. As the boy ran off to join his friends, Eleanor turned to find Nathaniel watching her with an expression that mingled approval and something deeper, less easily defined. "You belong here now," he said softly, "not visitor anymore, part of village life." The simple observation touched Eleanor deeply because she realized it was true. In just a few short weeks, she had begun to find her place in this community so different from any she had known before. The daily work, the shared meals, the gradual language acquisition, all had conspired to transform her from outsider to participant in village life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Eleanor found herself contemplating what this meant for her future. The winter lay ahead, months of living fully immersed in Shawnee culture. And after that, what path would she choose when spring returned and the time came to decide on her next journey? The question remained unanswered as she returned to Mourning Dove's lodge, where Liberty waited in the care of the young mother. But for the first time since arriving in the village, Eleanor allowed herself to consider that the future might hold more possibilities than she had initially imagined. including paths that didn't necessarily lead back to the settler world she had come from. That night, as Liberty slept peacefully in her cradle board and Morning Dove prepared her son for sleep, Eleanor sat by the lodge fire, writing in the small journal she had kept since Thomas's death. Using a piece of charcoal on pages made from flattened birch bark, a technique Morning Dove had shown her when her original paper journal filled, she recorded her thoughts about the day, about her growing facility with Shawnee language and customs, about the unexpected sense of belonging she had begun to feel, and in a brief passage she immediately wished she could erase, about the strange emptiness she anticipated during Nathaniel's upcoming absence. "It's foolish to become so dependent on his presence," she wrote, "yet I find myself dreading these days without his guidance, his quiet strength, his unexpected insights. What does it mean that in so short a time, he has become so essential to my sense of security here? And what will happen when spring comes and choices must be made that may lead us in different directions?" Questions without answers. Eleanor closed the journal, tucking it away in the small collection of personal belongings she had managed to retain from her former life. Thomas's land claim documents, her mother's letter revealing her Cherokee heritage, the silver locket containing miniature portraits of her parents, and the small knife Thomas had given her for protection on the journey west. Items from a life that seemed increasingly distant, like a dream half remembered upon waking. Yet they remained important touchstones, reminders of who she had been and what circumstances had shaped her journey to this unexpected place. As sleep claimed her, Eleanor's last conscious thought was a simple prayer of gratitude for Liberty's continued health, for the community that had welcomed them both, and for the man who had seen value in her life when her own family had cast her aside. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, bathing the Shawnee village in silver light. Tomorrow would bring Nathaniel's departure with the hunting party, another step in Eleanor's growing independence in this new world. For tonight, however, she rested secure in the knowledge that she was no longer merely surviving. She was beginning, against all odds, to live again. 5 days stretched into 7, the hunting party delayed by unexpected early snowfall in the northern valleys. Each morning, Eleanor found herself glancing toward the forest edge, watching for familiar figures returning with their bounty. Each evening, she tried not to acknowledge her disappointment when darkness fell with no sign of their arrival. "You missed Nathaniel," Morning Dove observed on the 7th evening as they sat preparing dinner in her lodge. It wasn't a question but a simple statement of fact, delivered with the directness that characterized Shawnee communication. Eleanor looked up from the corn she was grinding, a denial ready on her lips. But Morning Dove's knowing expression stopped her. What was the point of pretending? This woman had welcomed her into her home, shared her food and knowledge, cared for Liberty as if she were her own child. She deserved honesty. "Yes," Eleanor admitted softly. "I do." Morning Dove nodded, unsurprised. "Good man," she said simply. "Sad too long, needs new light and heart." The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. Eleanor busied herself with the corn grinding, unsure how to respond. Her feelings for Nathaniel had grown more complex with each passing day, gratitude blending with respect, friendship deepening into something she wasn't quite ready to name. "My husband returns soon too," Morning Dove continued, stirring the stew that bubbled over their small fire. "Black Hawk is strong warrior, good father." She hesitated, then added with a meaningful glance, "You will stay here still. Black Hawk, say welcome." Eleanor felt a wave of relief at this confirmation. She had worried that Morning Dove's husband might object to sharing his lodge with a white woman and her infant once he returned from his own hunting expedition. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'm grateful for your family's generosity." Morning Dove smiled, the firelight playing across her young face. "You are family now," she said simply. "Liberty and my son, like brother and sister. You and me, like sisters." The declaration touched Eleanor deeply. In the short time she had lived among the Shawnee, she had formed connections more meaningful than many she had known in her years among her own people. There was an authenticity to relationships here, unobscured by the social pretensions and hidden agendas that had characterized so much of her previous life. Their conversation was interrupted by excited shouts from outside. Morning Dove rose quickly, moving to the lodge entrance. "Hunter's return," she announced, her face lighting with joy. "Come!" Heart suddenly racing, Eleanor set aside her work and followed, Liberty secured in her carrying sling. The entire village had emerged to greet the returning hunters, who appeared at the forest edge laden with their bounty. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the successful hunt had yielded several elk and smaller game, food that would sustain the community through the coming winter months. She scanned the group anxiously, finally spotting Nathaniel toward the rear. He walked beside an older hunter, both men carrying a portion of a large elk suspended between them on a pole. Even at a distance, Eleanor could see the exhaustion in his gait, the strain of days of hunting followed by the difficult journey home with their heavy burden. As the hunters entered the village proper, they were greeted with cheers and welcoming calls. Women moved forward to help with the game, children danced excitedly around the returning men, and Chief Silver Fox emerged from his lodge to formally receive them. Eleanor remained at the edge of the gathering, suddenly uncertain of her place in this traditional homecoming. Should she approach Nathaniel immediately, or wait until the formal welcome was complete? Would her evident pleasure at his return be too obvious, too inappropriate? The decision was made for her when Liberty, spotting the commotion, began to wail with excitement. The distinctive cry of the village's only white infant drew attention immediately, including Nathaniel's. His eyes found Eleanor in the crowd, and even across the distance between them, she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical touch. After transferring his portion of the elk to waiting hands, Nathaniel made his way through the crowd toward her. He moved with the fluid grace she had come to associate with him, though she could see the weariness beneath it now that he was closer. "You returned safely," she said when he reached her, fighting to keep her tone casual, conversational. "Good hunting," he replied with a nod. "Much meat for winter." His eyes moved to Liberty, who had quieted at his approach and now stared at him with wide-eyed fascination. "She grows," he observed, a hint of wonder in his voice. "Even in few days." "She missed you," Eleanor said, then added more softly, "We both did." Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes, surprise perhaps, or pleasure at her admission. Before he could respond, however, they were joined by River Song, whose demeanor toward Eleanor had gradually shifted from open hostility to grudging acceptance over the weeks of her stay. "Council fire tonight," the young warrior announced to both of them. "Celebration of hunt. Important matters to discuss." He glanced at Eleanor, adding with unusual directness, "Woman who fell from sky should attend. Chief wishes it." With that cryptic message delivered, he rejoined the other hunters, leaving Eleanor puzzled. "What important matters?" she asked Nathaniel. "Has something happened?" Nathaniel's expression grew serious. "News from other villages," he said carefully, "and from trading post. Will be discussed at council." He hesitated, then added, "Rest now, celebration will last many hours. I will come for you when time is right." Though curious about what news could be significant enough to warrant her inclusion in a tribal council, Eleanor recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. The day's excitement had already tired Liberty, who was beginning to fuss in her sling. "Until tonight, then," she agreed. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary before he turned to rejoin the other hunters. As Eleanor made her way back to Morning Dove's lodge, she found herself wondering what developments awaited discussion at the evening council. Had there been word of Malcolm, news from the McAllisters at the trading post? Or was it something else entirely, something related to the village's plans for the coming winter? Whatever it was, the fact that Silver Fox wished her present suggested it concerned her directly. The thought brought both curiosity and apprehension as she settled Liberty for her afternoon nap and prepared herself for what promised to be a significant evening. The council fire burned high, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like earthbound stars seeking to rejoin their celestial brethren. Around it gathered the entire Shawnee village, men, women, and children arranged in concentric circles that reflected the community's structure. Elders and warriors sat closest to the fire, women and older children behind them, with younger children free to move between groups as their attention wandered. Eleanor sat between Morning Dove and Gentle Rain, Liberty sleeping peacefully in her cradle board nearby. The position was one of honor, she knew, close enough to hear the council's deliberations, included as a participant rather than a mere observer. Across the fire, Nathaniel sat among the warriors, freshly bathed and dressed in ceremonial buckskins, decorated with porcupine quills and beadwork. The formal attire lent him an increased dignity, emphasizing his status within the tribe. Occasionally, his eyes met hers across the flames, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. Chief Silver Fox rose, his weathered face solemn in the firelight. He began what Eleanor recognized as a formal prayer of thanksgiving for the successful hunt, his words carrying clearly in the night air. Though her understanding of Shawnee remained limited, she had learned enough to follow the general meaning. Gratitude to the Creator for the gift of the animals who had given their lives to sustain the people. Promises that their sacrifice would be honored through proper use of every part of their bodies. Prayers for their spirit's safe journey. The prayer concluded, Silver Fox continued with a recounting of the hunt itself, acknowledging each warrior's contribution. When he spoke Nathaniel's name, mentioning what appeared to be a particularly difficult tracking effort, appreciative murmurs rose from the gathering. After the hunt's celebration came the transition to more serious matters. Silver Fox's tone changed, becoming grave as he spoke of news received during the hunter's absence. Nathaniel began translating in a low voice, pitched to reach Eleanor without disrupting the chief's speech. Messenger came from Blue Sky Band 3 days ago, he explained. Government men visited their village. Speak of treaty, new agreement that would move all Shawnee west of Great River. Eleanor's breath caught. She knew from her limited knowledge of native affairs that west of Great River meant beyond the Mississippi, hundreds of miles from their current homeland. Our people have already moved many times, Nathaniel continued translating. Each time promised final home. Each time broken promise when white settlers want more land. Silver Fox gestured broadly, encompassing the mountains surrounding them. Chief says our band has retreated to these high valleys, away from best hunting grounds, away from ancestral sacred places, all to avoid conflict, to keep peace. Now they would push us farther still. The gravity of this news settled over Eleanor like a physical weight. She had witnessed firsthand the Shawnees' harmonious existence in these mountains, their careful stewardship of the land they inhabited. The thought of them being forcibly removed to unknown territories far to the west filled her with a deep sense of injustice. Silver Fox continued, his voice taking on a new urgency that Nathaniel translated faithfully. Second news comes from McAllister at Trading Post. Your brother by marriage still searches, though less actively. Offers gold to any who bring information. McAllister fears some trappers may be tempted by such reward, especially as winter approaches and supplies grow costly. Eleanor's fear of Malcolm, which had receded somewhat during her weeks of sanctuary, flared anew. The thought that he remained determined to find her, presumably to eliminate the threat she posed to his claim on Thomas's land, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the night air. McAllister's will come in 3 days, Nathaniel translated as Silver Fox continued. Bring winter supplies, news from settlements. Chief thinks good time to discuss future plans. The council then opened to broader discussion, with various warriors and elders offering their perspectives on both the treaty situation and the continued threat posed by Malcolm's search. Eleanor listened intently, catching far more of the conversation than she would have just weeks earlier, though still relying on Nathaniel's occasional translations for full understanding. To her surprise, Riversong spoke in her defense, arguing that her presence in the village had brought no harm thus far, and that her growing knowledge of healing plants had already proven valuable during Liberty's illness. The young warrior who had once viewed her with such suspicion now cited her willingness to learn Shawnee ways as evidence of her respect for their people. As the discussion continued, Eleanor became aware of a subtle but significant shift. She was no longer being discussed merely as a problem to be solved or a guest to be accommodated, but as a community member whose future was bound up with that of the village itself. Finally, Silver Fox turned to address her directly. Through Nathaniel's translation, he posed a question that caught Eleanor entirely off guard. Woman who fell from sky, the chief said formally, you have lived among us now for many moons. You have learned our language, our ways, our medicines. Your child grows strong under Shawnee care. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers across the fire. I ask you now, when spring comes and paths open again, what future do you seek for yourself and child of two worlds? The directness of the question, and being asked to respond before the entire village, momentarily robbed Eleanor of speech. She had, of course, thought about this question privately, but had not expected to address it publicly, nor so soon. Drawing a deep breath, she rose carefully to her feet, conscious of the protocol she had observed in council gatherings. The firelight illuminated the faces turned toward her, some curious, some supportive, a few still wary. "I am honored by your question, Chief Silver Fox," she began, speaking slowly to ensure her limited Shawnee was understandable. For words she didn't know, she used English, trusting Nathaniel to translate. "When I came to your village, I was broken in body and spirit. You offered healing for both. For this, my gratitude has no end." She glanced down at Liberty, still sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard. "My daughter was born on Shawnee land, delivered by Shawnee hands. This creates a bond that cannot be broken, whatever path we walk." Pausing to gather her thoughts, Eleanor continued with careful honesty. "I do not yet know what spring will bring. My brother by marriage still hunts me, making return to my own people dangerous. The land claim my husband left for our daughter's future waits in Oregon territory, but reaching it alone with a child would be difficult, even without Malcolm's threat." She straightened her shoulders, meeting Silver Fox's steady gaze. "What I do know is this. I have found more true kindness, more genuine community among the Shawnee than I ever knew among my own people. Whatever path opens when spring comes, I will walk it with gratitude for all you have taught me and with respect for the bond forged between us." As Nathaniel translated her words, Eleanor saw nods of approval among the elders. Silver Fox himself inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both her diplomatic response and the sincerity behind it. "Well spoken," the chief replied through Nathaniel. "The path often reveals itself only as we walk it. Until then, you and your child remain under Shawnee protection." With that pronouncement, the formal council portion of the gathering concluded. The celebration of the successful hunt began in earnest, with food being distributed and the first of what would be many songs rising from the gathered community. Eleanor returned to her place beside Morning Dove, her mind still processing the chief's unexpected question and her own response. Had she answered wisely, truthfully? The question of her future remained genuinely unresolved in her own heart, torn as she was between practical considerations and the emotional connections she had formed in the village. As the celebration continued around her, Eleanor found herself watching Nathaniel across the fire. He had joined a group of men who were recounting hunting stories, his usual reserve softened by the fellowship of shared experience. Occasionally he laughed at something one of his companions said, the sound carrying across the clearing to where she sat. In that moment, with firelight painting his strong features in golden shadow, Eleanor allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been avoiding for weeks. Her feelings for this man had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. There was an attraction there, a connection that transcended their different backgrounds and experiences. But what could possibly come of such feelings? When spring arrived, their paths would almost certainly diverge. She to Fort Williams, or perhaps even Oregon territory, he remaining with his people as they navigated the uncertain future, threatened by talk of treaties and forced relocation. Even if by some miracle they could remain in proximity, what kind of life could they build? The settled world would never accept a union between a white woman and a Shawnee man. She had only to recall the scandal that had surrounded her mother's sister, White Feather, who had married outside her Cherokee tribe, to understand how society viewed such relationships. Yet as Eleanor watched Nathaniel across the fire, these practical objections seemed suddenly less important than they should have been. There was something powerful in the connection they had formed, something that felt, in its way, as natural and inevitable as the changing seasons or the river's flow to the sea. The celebration continued late into the night, with dancing, storytelling, and feasting that honored both the successful hunters and the animals whose lives sustained the village. Liberty woke and was fed, then watched the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination before drifting back to sleep in Eleanor's arms. It was well past midnight when the gathering finally began to disperse, families returning to their lodges while a few warriors remained to tend the fire through the night. Morning Dove, whose husband would not return for several more days, collected her sleeping son and nodded to Eleanor that they should retire as well. As they prepared to leave, Nathaniel approached, his expression serious beneath the weariness of the long day and night. "Tomorrow, Ben," he said quietly, "we must speak important matters." Eleanor nodded, curiosity piqued by his solemn tone. "After morning meal?" "Yes, I will come to Morning Dove's lodge." With that brief exchange, they parted, Eleanor following Morning Dove back to their shared dwelling, while Nathaniel rejoined the men still gathered around the fire. That night, despite her physical exhaustion, Eleanor found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the council's discussions, the threat of forced relocation facing the Shawnee, Malcolm's continued search, the approaching visit from the McAllisters, and Silver Fox's direct question about her future plans. Beneath these practical concerns ran a deeper current of emotions centered on Nathaniel and whatever important matters he wished to discuss. Was it related to the council's deliberations? Or was it something more personal, connected to the subtle but unmistakable shift in their relationship during his absence? When sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor's dreams were a confusing tangle of images. Malcolm's searching face, Thomas's land claim documents transforming into treaty papers, Liberty growing from infant to woman before her eyes, and through it all, Nathaniel standing at a crossroads, beckoning her toward a path she couldn't quite see. Morning arrived with low clouds that promised snow before day's end. Eleanor woke early, Liberty still sleeping beside her. Morning Dove had already risen and left the lodge, presumably to join the women preparing the communal breakfast from portions of the Hunte's bounty. Taking advantage of the rare solitude, Eleanor spent time in prayer and reflection, a habit from her former life that had evolved into something more personal, less bound by the formal religiosity of her upbringing. Here, surrounded by nature and a people who saw the Creator's hand in every aspect of the physical world, her own spirituality had deepened in ways that would have scandalized her childhood minister. She had just finished nursing Liberty when Nathaniel arrived. He entered the lodge with the customary soft call that announced a visitor, waiting for her acknowledgement before stepping inside. "Good morning," Eleanor greeted him, settling Liberty in her cradle board. "You wish to speak with me?" Nathaniel nodded, his expression grave as he took a seat across from her. Between them, the lodge's small fire provided both warmth and gentle illumination in the gray morning light. "Council spoke long after celebration ended," he began. "Much concern about treaty talk, about future of our people." Eleanor nodded her understanding. "It must be frightening, the possibility of being forced from your homeland yet again." "Many moves in my lifetime," Nathaniel confirmed. "Each time promise of final home. Each time broken when white settlers want more land." He sighed, a rare display of the weight he carried. "Our young men grow angry. Some talk of fighting, though this brings only more death, more suffering." The sorrow in his voice touched Eleanor deeply. She had come to care for this community, to see them as individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams, rather than the faceless savages of settler narratives. The injustice of their repeated displacement sparked an anger in her that surprised her with its intensity. "What will your people do?" she asked. Nathaniel's gaze met hers across the fire. "Some will resist, some will go, some will try to find new way between old life and new world." He paused, then added more softly, "This is what I wish to speak of, the new way." Eleanor waited, sensing he had more to say. "Chief Silver Fox asked me to guide you and Liberty to Fort Williams when spring comes," he continued. "Safer journey with Shawnee protection. But also," he hesitated, seeming to search for the right words, "also opportunity to hike with government men there. Tell truth of what happens to our people when treaties are broken." The request took Eleanor by surprise. "Silver Fox wants me to speak on behalf of the Shawnee?" Nathaniel nodded. "You have seen our true way of living. You can speak with voice white men might hear. Woman with child, educated from respected family." His expression grew more intent. "Your land claim gives power too. Property owners have voice in white man's world." The strategy was shrewd, Eleanor had to admit. As a property-owning white woman, especially one with a legitimate claim on valuable land, she might indeed gain a hearing that would be denied to the Shawnee themselves. "I would be honored to speak on behalf of the village," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure how much influence I could truly have. Government officials rarely listen to women, even property-owning ones." "Any voice better than no voice," Nathaniel replied simply. "And your journey to Fort Williams serves your needs also. Safer place from brother by marriage. Place to establish claim on husband's land while deciding next path." The practical logic was sound, yet Eleanor sensed there was more to this conversation than the diplomatic mission Silver Fox had proposed. "There's something else, isn't there?" she asked directly. "Something more you wish to discuss?" Nathaniel held her gaze for a long moment before responding. Yes, he acknowledged. Something more personal. He leaned forward slightly, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. When you came to our village, I saw only woman who needed help, child who needed protection, duty to creators, creatures. Eleanor nodded, understanding this initial perspective. Now, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, I see more. See Eleanor who learns our ways with open heart, who brings healing knowledge to our people, who faces each day with courage that would honor greatest warrior. The unexpected praise warmed Eleanor's cheeks. You give me too much credit, she demurred. I've simply done what was necessary to survive and care for liberty. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. No false modesty needed between friends who know truth of each other. Friends. The word hung between them, simultaneously accurate and increasingly inadequate for what had developed during their months together. In spring, Nathaniel continued after a brief silence, paths must be chosen, you to Fort Williams, perhaps later to Oregon land. Me with my people, wherever Creator leads us in face of white man's treaties. The reminder of their inevitable separation sent a pang through Eleanor's heart. Yes, she said softly, our paths will likely diverge. Unless, Nathaniel said, the single word heavy with meaning, we choose same path. Eleanor's breath caught. What are you saying, Nathaniel? He met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes reflecting both certainty and vulnerability. I ask if you would consider a path where liberty grows with knowledge of both worlds, where your healing skills and my hunting provide for shared lodge, where what has grown between us might continue to grow, like sapling becoming mighty oak. Though not phrased as a conventional proposal, the meaning was unmistakable. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, her heart racing with emotions too complex to immediately name. I know this is not traditional for your people, Nathaniel continued when she didn't immediately respond. Man should court properly, speak to father or brother, offer gifts to prove worth. A hint of a smile touched his lips. But our meeting was not traditional either. Woman falling from sky, giving birth in Shawnee Lodge, perhaps requires new approach. The gentle humor broke through Eleanor's shock, drawing a small laugh from her despite the gravity of the moment. No, she agreed, there's certainly nothing traditional about our situation. Growing serious again, she studied his face, the strong features she had come to know so well, the quiet dignity that had impressed her from their first meeting, the depth of character revealed through their months of acquaintance. Nathaniel, she said finally, I can't deny that my feelings for you have grown far beyond gratitude or simple friendship. You've become, she hesitated, searching for words adequate to express the truth, essential to me in ways I never expected or planned for. His expression warmed at this admission, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. But a life together, have you truly considered what that would mean? The settled world would never accept such a union. We would belong fully to neither your people nor mine. I have thought of little else since Liberty's fever, Nathaniel admitted. Have seen how McAllister and Hannah build life between worlds. Not easy path, but possible with strong hearts, clear eyes. The reference to the McAllisters gave Eleanor pause. It was true that James and his Cherokee wife had forged a life that bridged their different cultures, but they lived at the trading post, a place that existed by its nature at the intersection of worlds. And Hannah, though native, was Cherokee, a tribe that had adopted many aspects of white society, including written language and formal education. The Shawnee face forced relocation, Eleanor pointed out gently. If you remain with your people, you could be sent hundreds of miles west. How would we? I would not stay with band if we joined lives, Nathaniel interrupted, surprising her, though would build new path, like McAllister. Trading post of our own, perhaps, near Fort Williams, but close enough to mountains for hunting. Place where Shawnee travelers find welcome, where your healing skills serve both peoples. The vision he described was both appealing and terrifying in its newness. A life carved from the wilderness, belonging fully to neither world but creating something unique between them. And liberty? Eleanor asked, her daughter's future uppermost in her mind. What would such a life mean for her? Nathaniel's expression softened as he glanced at the sleeping infant. Child of two worlds would love truth of her name, Learn ways of both peoples, languages of both, strengths of both. Difficult sometimes, yes, but rich life, full of understanding others cannot have. He hesitated, then added more softly, and not alone. Brothers, sisters perhaps, in time. Family bridging worlds, showing new path possible. The implication sent a flutter through Eleanor's heart. Children. A family with this man whose quiet strength and compassion had slowly but surely captured her heart, despite every rational objection. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. This is so unexpected. So, no answer needed now, Nathaniel assured her. Spring is still distant. Time to consider, to pray, to listen to heart's knowing. He rose to his feet, his manner shifting subtly back to the more reserved demeanor she was accustomed to. McAllister's come tomorrow. Many things to discuss then. Think on what I have said, but feel no pressure for quick words. Eleanor nodded, grateful for his understanding. I will think on it, she promised, and pray for clarity. With a final glance that conveyed both hope and resignation, Nathaniel departed, leaving Eleanor alone with her sleeping daughter and a heart full of conflicting emotions. Outside, the first snowflakes of the day began to fall, drifting past the lodge's smoke hole to occasionally sizzle in the small fire. Eleanor watched them, reminded of how the seasons had turned since her arrival in the Shawnee village. Summer had given way to autumn, and now winter was truly upon them. By the time spring returned, Liberty would be crawling, perhaps even taking her first steps. And Eleanor herself would need to take steps of her own, choices that would set the direction of both their lives for years to come. She had never imagined herself faced with such a decision. In the world she had come from, the very idea of a relationship with a native man would have been unthinkable, not because she shared the prejudices of her society, but because the opportunity simply didn't exist within the carefully segregated spheres of settler and indigenous life. Yet here she was, contemplating a future with a Shawnee hunter who had saved her life, delivered her child, and gradually, unexpectedly, captured her heart through his quiet strength, unwavering integrity, and genuine compassion. Was such a future even possible? Or was it a beautiful but impractical dream, destined to shatter against the harsh realities of a world that had no place for relationships that crossed the boundaries of race and culture? As Liberty stirred and began to wake, Eleanor set these questions aside for the moment. There would be time for decision-making. For now, there were the immediate needs of her daughter and the day ahead to attend to. Yet even as she went about these practical tasks, Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind, offering a vision of possibility she had never before considered, a path that belonged fully to neither the world she had come from nor the one she had found, but something new forged between them. The McAllisters arrived the following day as promised, their wagon loaded with trading goods and winter supplies. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, blanketing the village and surrounding forest in pristine white that muffled sounds and transformed the familiar landscape into something magical. Eleanor waited with the rest of the village as the traders made their way up the snow-covered path, their horses struggling occasionally with the laden wagon. James McAllister handled the team with expert skill, while Hannah sat beside him, wrapped in furs against the cold. As they reached the village clearing, Silver Fox stepped forward to formally welcome them, a protocol Eleanor now understood was essential to proper relations between the Shawnee and their visitors, even familiar ones. Once the formal greetings were complete, activity exploded around the wagon as villagers helped unload the trading goods and stable the horses. Eleanor found herself swept into Hannah's embrace before she could even offer a proper hello. "Look at you," Hannah exclaimed, holding Eleanor at arm's length to examine her. "Shawnee life agrees with you. And where is the little one? Recovered fully from her fever, I hope?" "Completely," Eleanor confirmed, gesturing to where Liberty watched the proceedings from Mourning Dove's arms nearby. "Thanks in no small part to your knowledge and medicines." Hannah's smile was warm as she moved to greet the infant, who had grown noticeably in the weeks since the Cherokee woman had last seen her. "She thrives," Hannah observed, touching Liberty's cheek gently. "Strong spirit in this one." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed. "And how fare things at the trading post? Is there news of Malcolm?" Hannah's expression grew more serious. "That's one of the matters we must discuss, but not here in the open. Silver Fox has called a council for this evening. All will be explained then. Though burning with curiosity, Eleanor accepted this postponement. Years of living among the Shawnee had taught her the value of patience and proper timing in communication. The day passed in a flurry of activity as the village incorporated the McAllisters' visit into their routine. Trade goods were examined and distributed, news was exchanged in informal gatherings, and preparations were made for the evening council. Eleanor found herself occupied with helping prepare the feast that would precede the formal discussions. Working alongside Mourning Dove and other women, she prepared venison stew enriched with dried berries and wild onions, a dish she had learned from Gentle Rain that had become something of a specialty of hers in the village. As she worked, Eleanor was acutely aware of Nathaniel's presence across the clearing, where he assisted James McAllister with repairs to the wagon that had suffered damage on the difficult journey. Occasionally, their eyes met briefly before both returned to their tasks, each exchange laden with meaning after their conversation of the previous day. By the time evening arrived, the snow had stopped, leaving a crystal-clear sky where stars emerged like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The council fire burned high, its flames reflected in the surrounding snow to create a circle of golden light in the winter darkness. The feast came first, a celebration of abundance before the serious discussions began. Eleanor sat with Hannah, the two women sharing observations about Liberty's development and Hannah's experiences at the trading post during the early winter season. "James has been teaching me to keep the accounts," Hannah mentioned with evident pride. "Not many native women learn such skills, but he says I have a better head for numbers than he does." "That doesn't surprise me," Eleanor replied sincerely. "You strike me as a woman of many talents." Hannah smiled at the compliment, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Speaking of talents, I've noticed how a certain Shawnee hunter looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks despite the cold evening air. "You're very observant." "It's a gift," Hannah agreed with a slight laugh, "and a necessary skill when living between worlds as I do." Her expression grew more serious. "Such a path is not easy, Eleanor, but for those with courage enough to walk it, there can be great rush alongside the difficulties." Before Eleanor could respond, Silver Fox rose, signaling the transition from feast to council. The mood shifted accordingly, conversation dying away as the village arranged itself in the traditional council formation. James and Hannah McAllister were given places of honor near the chief, while Eleanor found herself seated between Nathaniel and Mourning Dove, a position that acknowledged both her status as a guest and her growing integration into village life. Silver Fox began with formal thanks to the Creator for the food they had shared and the safety of the McAllisters' journey. Then, with a gesture toward James, he invited the trader to share his news. James rose, his tall figure imposing in the firelight. Though he addressed Silver Fox directly, his words were meant for the entire gathering, with Nathaniel translating the more complex passages for those whose English was limited. "I bring news both concerning and hopeful," James began. "First, regarding the man Malcolm Reed, who has been searching for his sister-in-law." He nodded toward Eleanor. "He remains in the area, though his search has become less active with the onset of winter. He's established himself at Fort Williams temporarily, telling all who will listen that he seeks a deranged widow who wandered from his wagon train in a fit of grief." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap at this characterization. The idea that Malcolm was spreading such lies about her mental state, presumably to discount anything she might say have found, filled her with cold anger. "More troubling," James continued, "he's formed an alliance with a government agent named Harrington, a man known for his harsh policies toward native tribes. Together, they've been gathering information about Shawnee movements in these mountains, ostensibly as part of treaty negotiations, but with an undercurrent that troubles me greatly." Silver Fox's expression remained impassive, but Eleanor could see the concern in his eyes as Nathaniel translated these words. "What kind of undercurrent?" the chief asked through Nathaniel. James's face grew grim. "Harrington has been asking specific questions about bands that might be resistant to relocation, making lists. I fear he may be preparing for forced removal rather than genuine negotiation." A murmur ran through the gathering at this translation. Eleanor had learned enough about the history of native-settler relations to understand the implications. Forced removal had often meant military action, violence, and death marches to distant territories. But James continued, raising a hand to indicate he had not finished. There is hope as well. A new Indian agent has been appointed to oversee the broader territory, a man named William Davis, who has a reputation for fair dealing and genuine respect for tribal sovereignty. He's due to arrive at Fort Williams in the spring to review all proposed treaties before they're finalized. This news brought a cautious optimism to the council. Eleanor had heard of William Davis during her time in Virginia, a Quaker with unusual views on native rights who had sometimes been ridiculed in more conservative circles for his sentimental approach to Indian affairs. If your people could present your case to Davis directly, James suggested to Silver Fox, there might be opportunity for a different outcome than what Harrington envisions. Silver Fox considered this information thoughtfully before responding. How would such meeting happen? Government men rarely come to village. If we go to fort, might be trap. James nodded his understanding of the chief's caution. That's where I believe Mrs. Reed might be of assistance, he said, turning to Eleanor. As a respectable widow with legitimate business at Fort Williams, establishing her land claim, you could request a meeting with Davis on your own behalf, then open the door for Shawnee representatives to join. All eyes turned to Eleanor at this suggestion. The strategy aligned with what Nathaniel had already discussed with her, using her status as a property-owning white woman to create opportunities for Shawnee voices to be heard. I would be willing, she said firmly, more than willing. I've seen firsthand how the Shawnee live in harmony with these mountains. If there's any chance my testimony could help prevent forced relocation, I consider it my duty to speak. Silver Fox nodded his appreciation of her offer before turning back to James. What of Malcolm Reed? If woman goes to Fort Williams, puts herself in his path. That's where the second part of our news becomes relevant, Hannah interjected, rising to stand beside her husband. While at the trading post, I had occasion to examine the papers Mrs. Reed carries, her husband's land claim, and other documents. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. She had shown Hannah the land claim during her previous visit, but hadn't realized the Cherokee woman had examined her other papers, including her mother's letter revealing her mixed heritage. Among these papers, Hannah continued, was a letter that mentioned a Cherokee woman named White Feather. Her voice softened with emotion. White Feather was my aunt, my mother's sister who disappeared from our village nearly 30 years ago when she married a white doctor. A shock ran through Eleanor at this confirmation. Then you and I are cousins, Hannah finished, distant perhaps, but blood nonetheless. The birthmark on your shoulder, the feather pattern, is a sign carried by women of our line for generations. The revelation created a stir among the gathered Shawnee. Eleanor herself felt momentarily dizzy with the implications. Her mother's letter had hinted at Cherokee heritage, but to discover a living relative here, in this place so far from everything she had known, seemed almost miraculous. This connection, Hannah continued, addressing both Eleanor and the broader council, offers a possible solution to the Malcolm Reed problem. Under Cherokee law, which is increasingly recognized by federal courts, you could claim tribal protection based on your lineage. Such protection would make any attempt by Malcolm to seize your property or your person a federal matter, rather than a local one. James nodded agreement with his wife's assessment. Harrington might align himself with a local land grabber like Reed, but he wouldn't dare interfere with tribal matters that could draw scrutiny from Washington. Davis in particular would take a dim view of such overreach. The strategy was clever, Eleanor had to admit. By embracing her Cherokee heritage, something she would have hidden in her previous life, she might gain protection from the very government whose policies threatened the Shawnee. There's something else you should know, Hannah added, her expression growing more serious. Something about Malcolm Reed that James discovered during inquiries at Fort Williams. Eleanor braced herself, sensing that whatever was coming would not be pleasant. Reed has been asking questions about more than just your whereabouts, James explained. He's been particularly interested in any white women living among native tribes, especially those with children. And he's been spreading rumors that you were intimate with Indians before your husband's death, suggesting any child you bore might not be legitimate. Gasps and mutters of outrage rose from those who understood English. Eleanor herself felt as if she'd been struck. The viciousness of Malcolm's strategy, attacking not just her but Liberty's legitimacy, revealed the depths to which he would sink to secure Thomas's land. "He fears your claim," Hannah said quietly, "and he fears what you might know about your husband's death. A man doesn't go to such lengths unless he has much to hide." Eleanor nodded, pieces falling into place. "Thomas was investigating some of Malcolm's business dealings before he died," she said. "I believe Malcolm poisoned him, though I could never prove it." This confirmation of murder brought a heavy silence to the council. Even those who hadn't understood the specific words could sense the gravity of what had been discussed. Silver Fox spoke at length in Shawnee, which Nathaniel translated for Eleanor and the McAllisters. "Chief says this man Malcolm Reed carries darkness in his spirit that threatens not just Eleanor and Liberty, but potentially all Shawnee if he allies with Harrington. The coming of spring will bring both danger and opportunity. Danger from those who would harm us. Opportunity in the arrival of this William Davis, who might listen with open ears." The chief continued, his weathered face solemn in the firelight. "Until then, woman who fell from sky and child of two worlds remain under Shawnee protection. When paths open again, we will send our strongest warriors to accompany them to Fort Williams, where they will speak truth to this new agent and seek justice for both Eleanor's husband and our people." The pronouncement carried the weight of formal decision. Eleanor felt both reassured by the continued protection and daunted by the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. Could her testimony truly influence government policy toward the Shawnee? Would embracing her Cherokee heritage provide the protection Hannah suggested against Malcolm's machinations? As the council continued to discuss practical matters, winter preparations, trading arrangements with the McAllisters, potential diplomatic approaches to the spring meeting, Eleanor found her attention drawn repeatedly to Nathaniel. He participated actively in the discussions, his status as one of the village's most respected hunters evident in how carefully others listened to his contributions. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Eleanor sensed a tension that hadn't been there before, a watchfulness directed primarily toward her. Their conversation of the previous day hung between them, unresolved but not forgotten. The council concluded late in the night, with arrangements made for the McAllisters to remain in the village for 3 days before returning to the trading post. As the gathering dispersed, Hannah approached Eleanor once more. "We have much to discuss, cousin," she said warmly, "about our shared heritage, about what it means to live between worlds, and about the path that I sense you are considering." Her glance toward Nathaniel made the reference clear. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "I would value your counsel greatly." As they walked together toward Morning Dove's lodge, where accommodations had been prepared for the McAllisters, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of emotions: anxiety about the challenges ahead, grief at the confirmation of Thomas's murder, wonder at the discovery of her Cherokee relative, and beneath it all, a growing certainty about her feelings for Nathaniel despite the complications such feelings entailed. The winter night embraced the village in crystalline cold, stars blazing overhead with fierce clarity. Tomorrow would bring more discussions, more planning for the uncertain future that awaited when spring returned to the mountains. But tonight, Eleanor allowed herself to simply appreciate the unexpected bonds of family and community that had formed around her and Liberty in this place so far from everything she had once called home. The 3 days of the McAllisters' visit passed quickly, filled with both practical preparations and deeper conversations. Eleanor spent hours with Hannah, learning more about their shared Cherokee heritage and discussing the realities of life as a woman with feet in two worlds. The settled world will never fully accept you if you choose to embrace both your heritage and a relationship with Nathaniel, Hannah warned candidly as they walked together through the snow-covered forest. You'll face prejudice, exclusion, even legal challenges to your property rights and Liberty's inheritance. Eleanor nodded, appreciating her cousin's honesty. And yet you found happiness with James despite these challenges. Hannah's expression softened. Yes, but we've built our life at the trading post, a place that exists at the boundary between worlds. And James is unusual among white men in his willingness to respect native ways. She glanced at Eleanor, her dark eyes reflecting both caution and understanding. I see how you look at Nathaniel and how he looks at you. Such feelings aren't easily denied, nor should they be if they're genuine. But the path such feelings would lead you down isn't an easy one. No path before me seems easy, Eleanor admitted. Returning to the settled world alone with Liberty, pursuing Thomas's land claim in Oregon, Living with a constant fear of Malcolm's retribution, these carry their own difficulties. Hannah nodded agreement. True, there are no simple choices after what you've experienced. She hesitated, then added more gently, but there can be joy even on difficult paths, if they're walked with clear eyes and an open heart. The wisdom in this simple statement resonated deeply with Eleanor. Whatever choice she made when spring came, there would be challenges to face, prejudices to overcome, practical problems to solve. The question wasn't which path would be easiest, but which one offered the most meaning, the most possibility for a life of purpose and connection. On the McAllisters' final evening in the village, Eleanor found herself alone with Nathaniel for the first time since his unexpected proposal. They stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the stars emerge as twilight deepened into night. Hannah tells me you've spoken much of life between worlds, Nathaniel said quietly. Eleanor nodded. She's been very honest about both the difficulties and the rewards. And her words have helped your thinking? Yes, Eleanor admitted, though not perhaps in the way you might expect. She turned to face him directly. She's made me realize there are no safe choices before me, Nathaniel. Every path carries risk, uncertainty, potential heartache. Nathaniel's expression remained calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he waited for her to continue. I've spent weeks, months really, trying to determine the most practical course, the one that would best secure Liberty's future and keep us both safe from Malcolm's threats. Eleanor smiled faintly. But practicality isn't the only measure of a life well lived, is it? No, Nathaniel agreed softly. Creator gives each spirit different path, some straight and clear, some winding through shadow and light. Worth of path not in ease of walking, but in truth of direction. The poetic phrasing touched Eleanor deeply. When spring comes, she said carefully, I will go to Fort Williams as planned. I'll speak with William Davis about the Shawnee's right to remain in these mountains. I'll use my Cherokee heritage as Hannah suggests to protect Liberty's claim on Thomas's land. She paused, gathering courage for what came next. But I don't wish to walk that path alone, Nathaniel. If your offer still stands, to build something new together, something that belongs fully to neither world, but creates its own place between them, then my answer is yes. The simple declaration hung in the cold night air between them. For a moment, Nathaniel remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the reality of her words. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for her hand. His fingers were warm despite the winter chill, strong and calloused from a lifetime of hunting and crafting. My offer stands, he said, his voice low and certain. More than stands, grows stronger with each day, like river fed by spring rains. Eleanor's heart swelled with an emotion too complex for simple naming. Joy and fear, anticipation and resolution, all tangled together in a knot of feeling that tightened her throat and brought unexpected tears to her eyes. It won't be easy, she whispered. No, Nathaniel agreed, his honesty one of the qualities she had come to value most. Not easy, but true, real, path with heart. He raised his free hand to gently brush a tear from her cheek, the gesture so tender it nearly undid her composure entirely. In my language, he said softly, there is word for when two rivers join, becoming something new, stronger than either alone. Sawanoki Thaki. This is what we could build, not my world or yours, but new waters flowing together. The beauty of the concept, and the fact that he had clearly thought deeply about what their union might mean, touched Eleanor profoundly. This was no impulsive passion, but a considered choice, made with full awareness of the challenges it would entail. Sawanoki Thaki, she repeated carefully, wanting to honor the word and its meaning. Yes, that's what I want for us, for Liberty, for any children we might be blessed with. A confluence of traditions, of strengths, of possibilities. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression then, a softening, an opening that revealed more of his heart than she had ever been permitted to see. With slow deliberation, he raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss of such gentle reverence on her knuckles that Eleanor felt it like a physical current running through her entire body. Then it is decided, he said simply. When spring comes, we go to Fort Williams together. Speak truth to new agent, secure liberty's inheritance, and begin building life between worlds. The commitment, so plainly stated yet carrying such profound implications, settled into Eleanor's heart with the rightness of a key turning in its lock. Whatever challenges awaited, from Malcolm's continued threat to the prejudices of society to the uncertain future of the Shawnee in these mountains, they would face them together, drawing strength from the very differences that should, by all conventional wisdom, have kept them apart. As they stood beneath the winter stars, hands still joined in silent promise, Eleanor realized that the path forward had been there all along, not in rejection of either her past or her present, but in the courageous embrace of both, creating something new that honored all she had been and all she might become. Liberty, true to her name, would grow up neither confined to the rigid expectations of settler society, nor limited to the increasingly threatened traditional life of the Shawnee. Instead, she would inherit a legacy of courage, adaptability, and the freedom to define her own identity between the worlds that had shaped her birth and early life. And Eleanor herself, woman who fell from sky, as the Shawnee called her, had indeed fallen into a new existence, one that had stripped away everything she thought she knew about herself and the world, only to rebuild her understanding on stronger, truer foundations. Spring would bring new challenges, new beginnings, the fulfillment of promises, and the testing of commitments. But for now, in this moment of decision beneath the winter stars, Eleanor allowed herself to simply exist in the certainty of the choice she had made. Not the safest path, perhaps, but the truest one for her heart and spirit. Beside her, Nathaniel stood tall and steady, his presence a promise of shared strength for whatever lay ahead. Together, they turned back toward the village, where firelight glowed warm against the snow, and Liberty waited, sleeping peacefully in Mourning Dove's lodge, unaware of how profoundly her future had just been shaped by her mother's courage to choose the unexpected path. As they walked side by side through the snow, Eleanor felt a sense of homecoming deeper than any she had known before. Not to a place, but to a possibility, a vision of life lived authentically across the boundaries that separated people from one another and from their truest selves. Sawanokithaki, she whispered again, the Shawnee word becoming a prayer, a promise, a declaration of intent for the journey that awaited when winter released its hold on the mountains and new life emerged from the thawing earth. Nathaniel's hand tightened gently around hers, a silent affirmation of shared purpose and deepening connection. No further words were needed as they returned to the circle of community that had brought them together against all odds and would now witness the unprecedented path they had chosen to walk side by side. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant arc across the heavens, a sign, perhaps, that even in a world of rigid boundaries and ancient divisions, new possibilities could still blaze unexpected trails across the darkness, illuminating paths not yet taken but rich with promise for those brave enough to follow their light.